YouTube channel EAL Committee. We are meeting today to conduct a public hearing on two bills, 26-0435, Board of Elections Certification of A and C Vacancies Amendment Act of 2025, and 26-436, Fair Initiatives Lend Transparency to Every Resident Amendment Act of 2025. I'll begin first by discussing these bills. 26-465, Board of Elections Certification of A and C's Vacancies. It was introduced in November after lengthy discussions with both the Board of Elections and the Office of Advisory Neighborhood Commissions on the difficulty of filling vacancies. One, advisory neighborhood commissions are incredibly important bodies in the District of Columbia. And of course, their input is critical to finding a suitable process for filling vacancies that may materialize during an election cycle. An ANC commissioner is often the first line for a district resident who needs assistance, has a problem that needs to be addressed, or who has an idea about how we can make the government work better for the people of our important community. They represent the interests of their neighbors and often work tirelessly to keep the public informed about what's happening in our city. Myself, a former ANC commissioner and chairperson of a commission, I can attest to the significance of making sure that we have those who would like to serve and get them on board as quickly as possible. And so today, I hope we'll examine the process before us to that extent. In fact, we have many vacancies currently in our ANCs. There are 16 vacancies across the city. These vacancies are particularly difficult to fill when an ANC has multiple vacancies and cannot meet quorum to even take official action or hold a special election. That is why we reached out to the Board of Elections to see how we can make this process work more effectively without incurring the significant costs associated with modern elections processes. The bill also contains provisions to allow an ANC or the Office of ANC to request that the board declare a vacancy with guardrails to ensure that a sitting commissioner is not expelled without cause. This is designed to make it easier to declare a vacancy in circumstances when a commissioner has changed their residency but neglected to officially resign. As we look forward to how to best fill these vacancies, we want to make sure that we are not creating new barriers for those interested in participating and for the commissions themselves. With that said, we have a number of ANC commissioners that will present their case, give us their insight, benefit of their insight. And I'm looking forward to hearing from each and every one who will participate today as our witnesses on how vacancies have affected their operations and what we can do to ensure the process runs more smoothly. The other legislative piece we will examine today is 26-436, the Fair Initiative provision. This was introduced because of some strong considerations from the public as to how the initiative process was working in the District of Columbia. As you know, the initiative process is one that is also very important, and it represents one of the many ways that a resident can get directly involved in the legislative process. But there are limitations on what can be presented. An initiative may be rejected, one, if it's not accompanied by a verified statement of contributions. It is not in the proper form. In accordance with DC Code 1-1001, 0436. If it authorizes or would have the effect of authorizing discrimination prohibited under Chapter 14 of Title II of the DC Official Code, and if the measure presented would negate or limit an act of the council involving the enactment of the local budget. That is DC Code 1-204.46. As those of you who are here today know, this process has often led to questions, particularly when a matter requires budgeting funds. The bill clarifies the process and ensures that initiatives which are balloted are fair and transparent. First, it requires that the fiscal impact to be determined upfront, both so voters and others are aware of the cost impact of what they are proposing. Second, it requires matters being presented to deal with one subject and matters that are properly connected with that subject. Of 24 states that allow for initiatives, 18 have some form of this requirement. The reason for this is to ensure that voters are able to cast their vote on each issue. When Initiative 83, as an example, was circulated, the matter contained two main proposals, and we heard from a number of people that while they were strongly in support of one or the other, they were not in support of the other. However, the items were contained in one initiative, and it was presented on the ballot as one initiative. Unlike with a piece of legislation that goes through council, there is no hearing on initiatives and no way for a voter to say, well, I like this piece, but not this. They are only given their vote, so we must know exactly what that vote is for. We can only do so if the matter is clear and addressed through one subject. The goal of this legislation is to ensure that voters know exactly what they're voting for, and if there is a cost, what that policy will cost. I see a few proponents of I-83 as an example that may be testifying today, and I look forward to hearing their perspective on this and how we can ensure that initiatives truly represent the will of the voters of the district. As a reminder, I will give everyone on this snowy day up to 5 minutes to speak. I want to remind all of our witnesses that their testimony will be a part of the official record. And for those who wish to submit written testimony, please upload it to the DC Council's hearing management system or email it to CEAL@dccouncil.gov, and that's CEAL. And the record will close at 5 p.m. on Friday, December 19th, 2025. With that said, do we have any? Okay, but do we have any of my colleagues? Okay, just checking to see if any of my colleagues were online. So we will solo today, and we will begin with our public witnesses. And we have online Joe Bishop Hinchman, Anthony Thomas Davis, ANC Commissioner from 1A06, Paula Edwards, Commissioner from ANC 4A01, and Huma. Okay, all right. Huma is not with us. So this will be our first panel. And Mr. Hinchman, you can begin. Thank you for being here, and I hope you're having a lovely day.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bonds and members of the committee. Thank you for holding this hearing on, well, two important proposals, but I'm going to be speaking about the issue related to ANC vacancies. And thank you for putting forward a potential solution to this problem. I mainly want to emphasize how much of a problem the status quo is and how a solution does need to be found for it. So I think you know this, Chairwoman Bonds, but others listening might not. But right now we have a very unclear law on what we do when there is a contested vacancy in an ANC in an ANC district. If it's an uncontested vacancy, it's pretty easy, and the statute plays out, and the one person, if only one person files and qualifies with the DC Board of Elections, then they become the commissioner. But when it's uncontested, that's where we are currently encountering lots of problems. The law requires that the vacancy be filled in 90 days and directs the DC Board of Elections to carry out responsibilities related to candidate declaration and verification. But then the statute kind of gets a little hazy after that on what it's supposed to happen. And generally played out is because the DC Board of Elections does not view it as its responsibility to carry out contested elections. The commissions themselves have had to step into the breach. And we have often, especially in the last 3 years, had the help of the Office of ANCs. For commissions, we are all volunteers. This is none of our full-time job. We don't, we may be very smart and very dedicated people, but running elections, we're really amateurs at that. And even the Office of ANCs, which does have full-time staff and is very dedicated to making sure that we're doing things professionally, they also don't have the expertise and the resources on running elections. So many of these special elections have been duct tape affairs where we are doing our best, but it's very clear to observers that these are not like the elections that are run by the DC Board of Elections at other points in the year. Voters don't get notification by mail. Anybody expecting to register same day is turned away. The hours of elections are quixotic because of the weird statute requirement of a 4-hour minimum, and so on and so on. So I am hopeful that a solution to this problem can be found because the status quo is not really sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now hear from Mr. Thomas Davis, Commissioner.
Good morning, Chairperson Bonds and members of the committee, as well as committee staff. My name is Anthony Thomas Davis, and I serve as the Commissioner for Single Member District 1806 in ANC 1A, representing the people of Columbia Heights. I am testifying in strong opposition to B26-0435, the Board of Elections Advisory Neighborhood Commission Vacancy Amendment Act of 2025. However, I thank the council member for trying to put forward what is a potential solution to this problem. While ANC 1A has had multiple vacancies, I can't speak to the complexities that my colleague just noted because we've always had a single candidate put forward. But I have to say, while this bill aims for administrative and procedural clarity, I think it achieves it at the fatal expense of local democracy, and particularly at a time where it's already a perilous time for the district's home rule autonomy and for our nation itself as we continue to see a lot of democratic guardrails bulldozed. This bill, I think, contains a number of fundamental flaws that will undermine, not improve, democratic representation and voter choice in our neighborhoods. The ANCs are really the most critical and granular level of our government. In effect, we function as a lower house of the legislative branch, and our authority has to be derived from voters trusting that their representatives are of their choice. And so I want to speak particularly to the process that is contemplated as it relates to multiple candidates in this bill. If passed, B26-0435 would fundamentally eliminate the right of voters to make a choice when there are multiple candidates in a particular race. the sitting commissioners of a commission would vote internally to select their peer on a permanent, not a temporary basis, at least until a special election could be held. That self-selection process, I think, fundamentally contradicts the principles of representative democracy that the district is built on and what we fight for every single day. It's going to disenfranchise voters. Under this proposal, it would maintain the requirement that a single candidate who would qualify would fill the vacancy automatically. Another SMD with a more robust, district that has a lot of civic engagement would be forced into this internal ANC process that, again, does not allow for an election that is currently required under law. We deal with a lot of complex issues as ANCs, right? Zoning matters, development matters, a lot of, complex APCA matters. Voters, I think, want someone that they trust to handle those complex, things, and they don't want to simply have this sense of to be very frank, tribalism that would set in where commissions would basically seat colleagues that they may like or that they may feel more, comfortable with, rather than someone that may actually be qualified to actually hold that seat. So I worry about what that means. I do want to point out a fatal contradiction in the bill. The bill retains a provision that allows an election to happen in the SMD that actually has the central detention facility as well as the correctional treatment facility. So it's almost like we're creating a distinction between we're still going to have special elections in person for that district, but we're not going to have it for any of these others that would have multiple candidates. So I'd love to understand from the committee why they are making that distinction. I have more comments for the record that I will provide to the committee. I want to end on a point regarding uh, this kind of list maintenance piece that I think the committee is trying to correct. The ANC members list, like all other lists of elected officials, is maintained and is very accurate and up to date by BOE. So I think inserting the OANC into that process will continue to frustrate and confuse what is already, I think, an accurate list. I note from the OANC's testimony they are in support of removing that. But I just wanted to note that is an accurate list, and I think agencies can rely on the information that they are getting directly from BOE, and they can always download again, accurate, up-to-date list. I just want to end by saying our ANCs do a lion's share of the work that really occurs on a day-to-day basis across the district, and they are, to me, the electoral foundation of what makes our district government work. I think by reviving this troubling system where they would be making direct appointments when there is a multiple candidate race is going to erode the trust that I think the ANC system has built in our government. It's going to, I think, frustrate how residents view us as serious deliberative bodies if they feel like a commission is, appointing their friend rather than someone that can be entrusted to do the arduous work that we have to do almost every day to make this government work a lot better. So I would urge caution from the committee to, again, get feedback, not just from those who are testifying today, but really solicit feedback from all the commissioners and really understand how we can improve this process in a way that actually retains voters' trust and make sure that they have a choice in selecting their representatives and not the commission choosing the representatives who will then, actually represent the voters. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony. And now we'll hear from Commissioner Paula Edwards, ANC 4A01. Commissioner.
Thank you very much for allowing me to testify this morning. I am Paula Edwards, ANC Commissioner for 4A01, which is parts of Shepherd Park, Colonial Village, and North Portal Estates. I am offering this testimony in my individual capacity as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. I'm testifying to register my opposition to the suggested process changes to B26-0435, Board of Education Certification of ANC Vacancies Amendment Act of 2025, which seeks to place the onus for filling the contested vacancies on the individual ANC commissioners. I believe that having the commissioners vote to fill a vacancy in the event of two or more contestants vying for the seat can result in political pressures on the commissioners and possible animosity from the losers and their supporters. Commissioners have enough to do without adding this to the list. Our commission began the term with 3 vacancies of 7 seats, and through constant solicitation, nagging, and begging, we have whittled that down to 1. OANC Director Bass has identified several issues with the proposed changes, and I advise that the that the committee include his recommendations if you decide on this course. Still, in the interest of maintaining neighborhood trust, I hope you will choose another course. The public has proven its lack of interest in participating in the elections to fill vacancies, making them a luxury costing at least hundreds of dollars per vote cast. An appointment by the mayor, council chair, ward council member, OANC director, or any other entity would be preferable. Even selecting a winner by lot could be justified and preferable to asking the commissioners to judge who is more fit to fill a seat and on what basis: a dance-off, lobbying by supporters, a trivia competition, or rank favoritism. Although we have been fortunate to have had only uncontested vacancies to fill, I believe the proposed solution will create more problems than it solves. I thank the committee and the board for recognizing that there is a problem, and I hope to work with everyone to find a better solution. Thank you, and I'm available for questions should you have any.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. And thank you to this panel. I don't know if we have the necessary time to just sort of explore, brainstorm how we might fill vacancies, but since the panel is concerned with the current legislation, we have to take the time to ask you, since you are here this morning, to talk with us about what do you see as a more suitable solution for addressing these vacancies? I know that, you're pretty much on board with the same thought, making it clear that having the board to be involved is the desired state of affairs. And so let's talk about how we get them involved as one option. And then let's talk about, are there any other ways in which we can get this matter addressed? And I'd be very happy to share what we did in 2008, 2006. And we had vacancies in my commission, and we moved forward with our election. Maybe it wasn't the best process, but we did an announcement. We held an election in one of our actual meetings. So that means it happened in the evening time, but we have new legislation that's in effect now. Came after 2008 that stipulates other kinds of safeguards. And so that's why we're put in this position today to think through how can we stay within the guardrails of the current legislation and still affect filling of vacancies and helping some commissions to actually move forward with their work. Because we've also now required that the commissions be smaller. In my day, our commission was 12 members. So it was much easier to say we would have a quorum. But if you are a commission of 5 or 7 members, and if 2 or 3 are missing, you do have a dilemma. So I put that before you, before this panel, and I'm open to hearing your suggestions. So please tell me what you think we can do differently on this matter.
Councilmember Bonds, I'll speak first if I
Okay,
may.
great, thank you.
I think particular to the concern around how BOE could play a role here. So thinking about how an election is structured, how it's facilitated at a location that is most accessible, I think that has largely been the concern is should the special election, if it does have multiple candidates, should it occur within the context of a special meeting of the ANC? I think it should not. I think it should be a separate event that the BOE working in conjunction with the ANC as well as the Office of ANCs, they could facilitate some kind of ADA accessible location within the SMD or somewhere in the commission, just area, and find a location that is most suitable, that is centrally, located for everyone. So I think that's the first piece. They could have staff there along with the OANC to kind of monitor and facilitate that process. I don't know the precise time span that should occur in. I know under current law, it has to at least be 4 hours. Maybe that's extended in some way just to account for a little bit more, time. But I think that is the first step is identifying a location that is most, accessible. I think the next piece is the OANC has indicated in, I think, a lot of conversation that they oftentimes don't have accurate, updated voter rolls. I think Commissioner Benjamin Hinchman said this as well. There should be a process whereby if someone is not on the voter roll, they should be allowed to have same-day registration and in effect cast a provisional ballot. That final tally wouldn't be able to be certified until later when you can actually verify whether that particular person can in fact be registered. So that's probably a little bit of an additional kink in that process. I think it would be helpful for the committee to examine authorizing BOE to conduct some sort of assessment of whether a special, mail ballot system could be instituted in this instance for a special election of an ANC. And I think finally, if the committee continues to believe that a quorum requirement should be met for future official action, it should permit the temporary appointment by a commission to seat someone on a temporary basis until a special, until a special election could be held. And I think that is something that could potentially help in this process is that if a election has to be held within 90 days, a temporary appointment could get the commission from point A to point B. So I think those 4 or 5 suggestions could, I think, enable, further conversation, and I look forward to working with the committee on that.
Thank you very much for your input. And I'll ask, Mr. Henchman,
Yes.
do you have some ideas? I know you must. Okay.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bonds. And I don't think I disagree with anything that Commissioner Thomas Davis just said. If we're going to do elections, they should be elections. Or if we're going to do appointments, they should be appointments. Right now, we've got the statute that says it's elections and then doesn't put anyone in charge of doing the elections, and certainly doesn't provide the resources and the direction on how to do it. If we're going to do elections, I think it only makes sense that it be the DC Board of Elections that conduct them. They have the full-time staff. ANCs don't have full-time staff. They have the equipment. ANCs don't have equipment. They have the templates for ballots and signage and translation materials. ANCs don't have that. They have the relationships with the venues that serve as polling locations every 2 years, more frequently than every 2 years. ANCs don't have that. So if it's going to be elections, it only makes sense to me that the burden of putting these on fall to the agency that is best equipped, literally, to do it. And if they're going to be appointments, I think Commissioner Edwards gave quite a few different options in her testimony. Maybe some of them were a bit facetious, but I think they're very realistic options to be considered. So, Commissioner Imtiaz wasn't able to testify this morning. I think she did submit written testimony, but she expressed concern about evenly divided commissions, upon one of which she serves on, and kind of how that plays out if you leave it to these commissioners who represent every district but the one where the vacancy is being filled, how that works out. So maybe having the ward council member, the mayor do appointments, even on a temporary basis, as Commissioner Thomas Davis suggested, may be preferable if the decision is to go the appointment route. But I do want to underscore the status quo is not really sustainable. And so I do thank you for continuing the conversation on this.
Thank you very, very much. Commissioner Edwards, do you want to add to this conversation?
Yes, I do. And it's, thank you very much again for trying to find a solution for this, because as Commissioner Henchman said, this is not tenable. But I think we also owe a duty to our taxpayers. The voters of the District of Columbia have repeatedly demonstrated that they are not necessarily interested in voting in these contests. I mean, the ideal is wonderful. The Democratic ideal is fabulous, but people vote with their feet. And they are not coming to these elections. If they are conducted by the Board of Elections, we are spending hundreds of dollars per vote. And I think that really is a waste. I've worked in elected politics in states all over the country, and many of them fill vacancies for Congress, for many more substantive seats by appointment, or some of them you do it by lot. And I really think we should consider what's fairest to the taxpayers as well as the residents. And since these are vacancies and they are not for the entire term, I think we really need to look at more practical solutions. And one of those, and some of those I said, are to follow the dictates of other states and look at how other states do it. But I'm very willing to work with everyone to work something out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It sounds like we are beginning the process of putting together a task force or like working out solutions, but we'll hear from other panelists and take into consideration their comments as well. Thank you very much to this, the first panel. Thank you. Our second panel is Andrew Klein, Ashley Ruff, ANC Commissioner, Single Member District 7F02, Gottlieb Simon, that many of us know, former Executive Director of the Office of ANCs, Patricia Stampler, It's listed as an individual, but I believe Ms. Stampler is also a commissioner in Ward 7. So that's our second panel. All right. From that group, we have two, Andrew Klein and of course Gottlieb Simon. And I think for everyone, we'll just move on to the third panel and see if we have any. All right, we have for the third panel, Zachary Israel, Dorothy Brazil, Executive Director, DC Watch, Nicholas Schiller, again, individual, and Brian Strudd, Chair of ANC 68F. And all right, I think we have 4 from this group. We're going to start with Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein, we'll take your testimony. Mr. Klein, you are muted.
You can hear me now?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, Councilmember Bonds.
Good morning.
And any members of the committee that may be watching elsewhere. I'm Andrew Klein. I'm the co-founder of the Veritas Law Firm, and I'm general counsel to the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington. Our law firm has quite a bit of experience with the initiative and referendum processes, as we've litigated issues surrounding these processes at least 4 times, mostly related to tipped minimum wage, but actually dating back to the proposed smoking ban initiative. My first recommendation is that language be added to the statute, which requires the Board of Elections to act as an impartial arbiter of the statute and regulations governing initiatives and referenda, rather than an advocate for or against a particular initiative. You probably think that that's unnecessary. However, when we've argued before the court concerning referendum 8, which sought to overturn the repeal of Initiative 77, counsel for the Board of Elections stated that the board had willfully ignored the statute concerning notice of its meeting because of fears that the proponents would not have enough time to collect signatures if the law were followed. We didn't even have to remind the court that this is not the job of the Board of Elections to aid proponents in this way in violation of law. Just last month, in a challenge to the board's process in moving forward referendum 9, the board stated in a court pleading that, and I quote, "The restaurant industry should not be entitled to have input into the language of," close quote, "the summary statement and the text of the proposed referendum. To conclude otherwise would be to presume that the law allows the fox into the henhouse." Of course, the restaurant industry has a legitimate interest in having input into the language of a ballot measure, which seeks to overturn a law the council and parties worked hard to craft this past summer, and has much of a right under the law as the proponents to be heard on this matter. The board's position, as set forth in open court and in court pleadings, is quite stunning. In addition, it is appropriate to limit the frequency with which issues can be subject to ballot measures. The tipped wage issue has been the subject of at least 5 ballot measures in the last 10 years, all funded by out-of-town interest. We recommend that once an issue has been subject to an initiative, it should be ineligible for another initiative for at least 5 years. Lastly, although the current statute prohibits initiatives which directly impinge upon the council's budget actions, it allows measures which can have a dramatic effect on revenues, such as wage measures, all of which threaten the viability of various industries and therefore undermine the district's tax revenues. Every proposed measure should be subject to a fiscal impact statement and should be disallowed if found to have a substantial impact on revenues. Thank you for hearing my testimony, and I'm of course happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Gottlieb Simon is still the only one. Okay. All right. We'll now hear from Mr. Gottlieb Simon, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Councilmember Bonds.
Good
My
morning.
name is Gottlieb Simon. I am currently the chairperson of ANC 6D, and from 2001 to 2021, I served, as you noted, as executive director of the Office of ANCs. I am here to comment on Bill 26-0435. I am most concerned with how it would fill an SMD vacancy, and I'll add further comments in my written testimony. The bill proposes to have the remaining commissioners choose which candidate shall fill a vacancy, rather than having the residents of the affected SMD do it. This is a step backwards, not a modernization. It was allowed for a period in the past, and in my experience, did not work particularly well. This is a blatantly undemocratic move, and if enacted, it would be an embarrassment to our quest for full self-determination. If that were not enough, in another undemocratic move, the bill would allow an ANC quorum to be less than 50%. My ANC has 8 commissioners, but the legislation would allow just 2 of us to choose a replacement. And I'm not sure how we'll handle ANC 2D, which only has 2 commissioners to begin with. Lowering the definition of a quorum is just a very bad idea and must not become a precedent for how other decisions might be made. If we can't have resident elections, it would be better to deem the candidates tied and to choose the winner by casting lots. Again, it is the height of irony that only the people living in the SMD with the DC jail would be allowed to vote. The law, by the way, currently has 2 ways to resign. One is by a simple letter of resignation. While the resignation can become effective immediately, there is a dead period until the vacant seat can be filled. The other way is called a prospective resignation. The difference here is that the Board of Elections can start filling the seat while the resigning commissioner is still in office. The bill appears to conflate these 2 methods and require that all resignations be sworn statements. This needlessly complicates the situation, and I can tell you that the last thing that a commissioner needing to move will be concerned about is getting their letter of resignation notarized. Putting aside the issue of how vacancies are created and filled, I agree, we have a problem when a commissioner appears to have abandoned their seat by not attending meetings, or when in the eyes of some, they appear to no longer live in the SMD from which they were elected. However, putting responsibility on the affected ANC to initiate action is neither fair nor constructive. ANCs should not be saddled with responsibility for doing this. Residents, however, should have a say. And I do have some thoughts about how we might be able to reduce the number of resignations. But in conclusion, this hearing is indeed a helpful start to resolving these problems. I hope the conversation initiates will continue, and I believe I heard you say that there might be a task force set up to do this. But I don't believe the solutions that Bill 26-0435 now offers should be adopted as now written. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and nice to see you. Next, I think we have Zachary Israel. Is he on? No. All right, Brian Shreech, we have you on, I understand, ANC 68F chairperson. Welcome.
Hey, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, Councilmember Bonds, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of this committee again about yet another process bill, another initiative process bill. My name is Brian Strege, and I'm the chair of ANC 68F. I'll be testifying on the topic of the Fair Initiatives Lend Transparency to Every Resident Amendment Act, which I'll refer to from here on out as the Filter Act. I'm assuming that acronym was intentional. The last time I spoke in front of this committee, I testified in support of your bill called the Petition Administration Clarification Amendment Act, and I was happy to see that one of my recommendations has been included in its updated language. While I supported that bill, the one I'm here to talk about today, the Filter Act, is to me more of a mixed bag. There are a couple things in it I like, a couple things that I would tweak, and one big thing that I'm very much against. I want to spend most of my time here today talking about the piece that I'm against. I'll go through the other pieces in much more detail in my written testimony, but just a quick overview of the other ones. Most of the timeline extensions in the Filter Act seem reasonable to me. Having the fizz come first in the process before the proper subject matter hearing, I think it's probably the best part of this bill to me. Some of the things surrounding Initiative 84 confused me, and I think this will clear that up a bit. One caveat on the fizz piece, which I do not support, is the inclusion of the cost on the petition sheet and on the ballot. Voters just aren't familiar with the usual cost of legislation, and the only practical effect of this provision would be to discourage signing a petition or voting for an initiative. And I don't love the 6-year wait out provision, but I'm at least a little sympathetic to the idea. I'd rather it be 4 years instead of 6. Anyway, now I'd like to talk about the piece of the Filter Act that I'm strongly opposed to, which is the new single subject matter requirement for initiatives. While I'm absolutely in favor of making improvements to the initiative process, such as by making the order of operations make more sense, I'm staunchly opposed to the council attempting to impinge on what can or cannot be put on the ballot and brought to the voters by our power of initiative. We have a legal principle here in D.C., written by the D.C. Court of Appeals in an old case known as Convention Center 3, regarding our right of initiative. To quote from that opinion, absent express or implied limitation, the power of the electorate to act by initiative is coextensive with the power of the legislature to adopt legislative measures. To put this in my own words, if the council can pass something, so can the voters, with the big exception of laws that appropriate funds or in some way bind the council to do so. So the DC Council, right now, if they so choose, can put multiple topics into a single omnibus bill and pass it with a single vote. This may or may not be a good way to legislate, but sticking with the principle that the power of initiative is coextensive with the power of the council, the proposer of an initiative should also have the power to construct an omnibus initiative. Sometimes packages make sense. I believe that the electoral reforms in Initiative 83 made sense together. The initiative document, or the introduction document, for the Filter Act justifies the single subject provision by stating that of the 24 states that allow some type of citizen proposed initiative, most have a single subject requirement. So it's pitching this as sort of a best practices for initiatives in DC. The problem with this is that it's missing a key bit of context, which I'll get to in a minute. But first, a quick note on our right of initiative here in DC. We in DC have the direct right of initiative. We, the voters, can make law without the council. Some states have only an indirect right of initiative, where they still have to deal with their legislature. On the other hand, we only have the ability to pass statutes. We can't edit the charter. In other words, any law we can pass as voters, the council can just repeal. These two things together, again, reinforce that under our system, our right to legislate is coextensive with that of the council. We're operating on the same plane. We can repeal each other's laws, but we can't create law out of each other's reach. So here's the key bit of context. When looking at other states, there's one very big item being left out here. Most states, 43 or 41, depending on how you count, have single subject requirements on their own legislatures through their state constitutions. DC, on the other hand, does not have a single subject requirement in our charter. Out of all the states with citizen proposed initiatives, only one, Massachusetts, imposes a single subject requirement on initiatives, while they have not imposed one on their own legislature. And Massachusetts is one of the indirect initiative states. There are 0 states with the direct right of initiative that impose a single subject requirement who have not imposed one on their own legislatures. 0. So, in keeping with the principle that the right of initiative here in DC is coextensive with that of the council, I have a suggestion. If the council wants to limit initiatives to a single subject, first mandate that same requirement upon yourselves. To conclude, I implore you to remove the single subject requirement from this bill. It's unnecessary, certainly violates the spirit of direct democracy defined in the charter, and does not bring us into alignment with other states, but instead would make us a massive outlier. From a small d democratic perspective, it would look absolutely terrible to be the only jurisdiction in the country where the legislature has no single subject requirement upon themselves, but they've imposed one on their own voters. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Okay. I think Commissioner Stamper will take your testimony now.
Good morning, committee. On how are you guys doing? So, I'm here for two things. The technical assistance fund for the office of the ANC. It was funded with COVID funds, federal dollars that we received from the government. However, according to the OANC rules, people cannot be reimbursed, or commissioners can be reimbursed if they find an OSCE certified child care provider to provide child care for them during public meetings. However, typically ANC public meetings are held in the evening for approximately 2 hours during the week. There's no OSCE child care provider that is going to come in and provide child care for 2 hours once a month, out of what, 10, 12 months. It's just not, the math isn't mathing, and it's not like a good sound business decision. However, the technical assistance fund of the office of the ANC, my request of this body is for it to define child care as a technical assistance, because here's why we should do that. I believe that if we define childcare as a technical assistance, we would expand our reach for civic engagement. Even if we covered elder care, hypothetically speaking, if we got 2 or 3 people to provide elder care. Also, we covered childcare for the first 20 kids that showed up at an ANC meeting. That would change the level of engagement that we have at ANC meetings, and for people to come and engage in person at these meetings rather than from a virtual posture or just not coming at all. I really believe that would remove a barrier to access to the civic process here in DC. Also, this is another thing. I believe there should have been an Initiative 83 and an Initiative 84. I believe we as voters didn't do our due diligence, and we got something on the ballot, and it's actually 2 separate things rolled into one. And we voted on it, and it's gotten passed, but the Board of Elections is not prepared to roll out ranked choice voting for the primary in June. I've gone personally to and volunteered my services to the Board of Elections to support them in creating the literature and the education information to educate DC voters about ranked choice voting, especially east of the river here in Ward 7 and 8. With that being said, they need money, they need time. It's not there. It seems like they're not ready, and I don't want us to be caught holding the bag and not being properly invested and properly taken care of here in Ward 7 and Ward 8. With that being said, in closing, please consider childcare as a technical assistance under the Office of the ANC. I believe this is an easy thing. We can ask the commanders to put money in there as a community benefits agreement and direct that money to the Office of the ANC, to the Technical Assistance Fund for childcare, for elder care, for public ANC meetings, because it would change the level of civic engagement here in the District of Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Do we have any others that are, okay. All right, we'll now hear from Mr. Israel. We'll take your testimony.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Bonds, members of the committee. My name is Zach Israel. I am a former advisory neighborhood commissioner, just like you, Councilmember Bonds. And I have a couple of thoughts on the bill that you introduced, one of the two before us today, B26-0435, the Board of Elections Certification of ANC Vacancies Amendment Act of 2025. Like several witnesses have already discussed this morning, my major issue of concern and opposition in this proposed bill is regarding how to fill the vacancies in a contested race for an SMD. I think it's very, very problematic that we would have a process in which the commissioners themselves would get to vote on who should serve in a single member, represent a single member district for the remainder of the 2-year term, when none of them represent any part of the S&D in which they are filling the vacancy. And one thing that I think is comparable here, I want to just throw out as a thought experiment. I think there's a reason why none of the ward level council members on the DC council, if there's a vacancy, there is no process that allows the council to choose an appointment to fill that vacancy at the ward level. There's always a special election administered by the DC Board of Elections. We just saw that in Ward 8 this past July. They had to spend several $100,000 to do it, but they did it because otherwise other ward level council members in the DC council who do not represent Ward 8 would have had the power to pick the replacement for that ward. And so similarly at a commission level, if the council actually wants to respect the institution of ANCs and commissioners, and most importantly, the 2,000 people who actually live in the single member district where there's a vacancy, you should not move forward on this provision. What I would propose as an alternative is, I think, a common sense approach where the council provides funding to the DC Board of Elections to then actually administer a special election. And there's only a handful of these every year, to be clear. We can go back in the records, but it's probably an average of 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 every calendar year where this actually happens. Have the DC Board of Elections, who is a professional independent agency that has expertise in this, to hold a special election in a public space in the commission area and have an election. And do allow for mail-in ballot voting in that special ANC race, allow for voters or rather allow for people who are not currently registered voters but live in the SMD to register as a voter on site in person at the election and then vote in the election, which is something that cannot be done in the current system we have, where Director Bates and the OANC staff who do great work are not legally allowed to register people at these special elections currently. So let's just do that and then actually empower the residents of an SMD to actually vote for who their representative is. I think it's worth the money to protect our democracy and make sure people get to choose their representative on their advisory neighborhood commission. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Is that it? All right, that is our panel. All right, I'll go back to, all right, I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Israel. Thank you very much for your comments. I tried to make notes of your alternative ideas. And as I've asked the sitting commissioners, your ideas will be incorporated into their ideas. And I want to thank you very much for that. You should know that the idea of trying to fill these vacancies has been very daunting. And the meetings that our office has held between the Office of ANCs and the Board of Elections have been very challenging, to say the least. And so I appreciate all of the comments that we're getting from you and from the sitting commissioners, because we really are looking for a path to success so that we're in compliance with the legislation, with the law as well, and trying our very best to reach some sort of compromise so that it's a system that we can actually depend on. So thank you very much for your testimony. I'll say to, I believe Commissioner Stamper, I hear what you're concerned with today, and that's the definition of childcare becoming treated as technical assistance, and we will endeavor to work on that. So you have our commitment on that. Thank you too for your comments on the Board of Elections moving forward on a matter that they are concerned with in the 2026 election cycle, and that's trying to roll out ranked choice voting. So your comments will be added to comments that we receive from a number of other individuals as it relates to the Board of Elections readiness on this. And of course, Mr. Sergi, Chairperson, thank you very much for your comments. I will ask you also, do you have some alternative suggestions or brainstorming as it relates to how the board can address this issue of filling vacancies?
Yeah, that is another issue I haven't given a lot of thought to, the ANC vacancies issue. I do kind of agree with the, wanting to stick with the small d democratic principle of having ANC vacancies be filled by the voters and not by commissions. I come from a pretty small ANC commission. There's 5 of us, and we've had a vacancy in the same SMD twice now. And having just 4 people pick that replacement to me feels a little off. But I do appreciate trying to solve the problem. I think somebody on here, just said the current situation is untenable, and I agree with that. It doesn't seem good to be conducting elections in a very narrow window of time where people can't get registered the same day and all that. On the other hand, burdening the Board of Elections with random, ANC vacancies that pop up. Maybe they don't have the resources. I don't know. Maybe there could almost be like a synced up time, like once a quarter, where all the ANC vacancies are in the city are filled instead of having them randomly pop up. It could be on a schedule, something like that. But that's something I've thought about very briefly. So.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. And Ms. Stamper, I did fail to ask you if you have some thoughts about the filling of vacancies of ANCs.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question one more time? I didn't fully hear you.
Yes, some of the sitting commissioners have provided some brainstorming, some ideas on how the filling of vacancies that occurred on a commission might be handled, which is
Yes, I do believe. Yeah, I think we should be able to, as a commission, 7C is about to experience a vacancy soon. And I believe they should have the power, the chair, and maybe the executive body of the commission 7C to appoint someone to the seat rather than it sit empty. And then we have a gridlock with votes. There's 9 members on the commission for ANC 7C. If a member was to resign for whatever reason, it will create a 4-4 deadlock in some issues, and I wouldn't want that for the Deanwood, Burville, Capitol View 7C community.
All right.
So I do believe we should have the power to appoint, just like hypothetically speaking, if Robert White wins the seat, right? Chairman Mendelson should be able to appoint somebody, hypothetically speaking, like Kevin Chavis or Charles Wilson or even Patricia Stamper to fill the rest of his term, right? So I think it should be within the powers, just so we don't waste money and we're more conservative, because it's a tight budget season. Why waste money on an election and all that when we could just appoint and keep it moving?
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. And I also want to hear from Gottlieb Simon, chairperson of, let me make sure I've got it right. Chairperson of ANC 6D.
Correct.
You
Well, I
said you had
suppose,
lots of ideas, so let's put them on the table and then let's see if we can't get a task force moving forward.
well, I start from the position that it's simply undesirable, and the notion of having the chairperson of the council appoint someone to fill a vacancy, or members of the council, I think self-evidently shows that this would be a terrible idea if it was brought down to the ANC level, because it doesn't work at that level either. I would support some fashion of the method that we used prior to COVID. It wasn't a 4-hour window. There were some reductions that had to be made. It wasn't a perfect election system, but you recollect how it was done in, I believe, 5C at the time. That's preferable to having an appointment system just on the basis of that point alone. And I might add that I heard a concern that there has to be an official meeting to set a meeting, and that's not so. Um, we're allowed to call a meeting when there isn't a quorum to do so. Otherwise, a, a deliberative body would never be able to resume its activity if it lacked a quorum at one meeting. So I just want to add that to the record.
All right, well, thank you very much for your input. We'll move to our next panel. Okay, it seems that Nicholas Schiller has joined us from panel 3 in the event you have your listing. And Dorothy Brazil is saying that she is on, but we do not see her. Perhaps she's registered under a different name. I don't know. But we'll start with Mr. Schiller. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. Good morning, Councilmember Bonds, committee members, and staff. My name is Nicholas Schiller, and I'm testifying against the Filter Act today. While the ballot initiative process could be streamlined, this legislation doesn't do a very good job. First, this legislation effectively eliminates the ability for citizens to conduct a referendum. It makes what is already an extremely difficult task completely impossible. As written, this proposed law likely violates the Home Rule's charter delegation of referendum power, and I can see it being challenged in the courts. It currently takes about 20 to 25 days for a campaign to submit a referendum, DC Board of Elections hold appropriate hearings, and the expiration of a challenge period before a campaign can receive its ballot access petitions for the referendum. Under the changes outlined in this proposed legislation, it would take approximately 120 days. Let's not forget, the referendum can only be carried out while a law is under the congressional review period of 30 days, legislative days. This makes the current 25 days such a tight time frame that campaigns generally have about 2 weeks or even less to circulate petitions before the law goes into effect. This legislation effectively should make referendums easier, not unlawfully impossible. Secondly, this legislation adds another layer of bureaucracy to the ballot initiative process. Right now, a voter can challenge the subject matter determination, short title, summary statement, and legislative text once the ballot initiative has been published in the DC Register. By this point, the legislative text of the ballot initiative has been available for a review for over 60 days. But your proposed law gives voters, or more correctly, lawyers, another opportunity to prevent the initiative from moving forward by allowing the subject matter determination to be challenged first. Then it gives agonists the ability to also challenge a short title summary statement and legislative text again. It is completely redundant and only works in favor of lawyers seeking more billable hours and business interests who wish to stop the will of the people. Third, the introduction states that you wrote, just as council members are informed of the costs of a piece of legislation before they cast a final vote, electors in the District of Columbia should be able to readily ascertain the cost of a policy when they are signing their name on a petition sheet or filling out the ballot. Signing a ballot access petition is not voting. It's simply saying that you believe voters should be able to have the right to vote on the matter. I have zero problem with the requirement of putting the fiscal impact statement on a voter's ballot just because they're going to make that decision when they're voting. They'll be able to see that information because it's when they are acting like a council member casting their final vote. But putting this information on the petition aims to discourage people from signing. Nearly all laws cost money to implement, and this is just a scare tactic to say, oh, it's going to cost money. Well, of course it is. Moreover, there's no means for campaigns to challenge the veracity of a fiscal impact statement without harming their campaign. For Initiative 83, the FIS erroneously included $392,000 for outreach and education twice. This artificially increased the fiscal impact statement by 26%. This legislation also wastes government resources by requiring the FIS before the measure is deemed proper subject. Let's say an initiative was submitted that legislates discrimination. Why should a fiscal impact statement be generated when the measure is not proper subject to begin with? The existing process requires the FIS after the initiative is deemed proper subject and ensures government resources are used appropriately. Fourth, what defines a single subject? This legislation fails to limit the scope of what is a single subject. Initiative 83 addressed ranked choice voting and opened the primaries to independent voters. Both of those fall under the subject of expanding democracy. But it could also be argued that there are two different subjects under the umbrella of expanding democracy. If a voter likes one and not the other, as you mentioned earlier, no one's forcing them to vote either way. And it's the same way with council members. They get an omnibus bill that has a bunch of different things, and they might not like one thing, but they still vote for it all. Or they say, you know what, because of that one specific thing there, I'm voting against it. Nevertheless, voters wanted both the reforms in Initiative 83, and it was the council who voted against the electorate by continuing the ongoing violation of the Human Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on a voter's political affiliation, which is why all independent voters should be afforded the right to be able to participate in primary elections. Finally, this legislation fails to define the scope of what it means for a law to include more than one subject, or matters not properly connected with the subject. But if the ballot initiative process is supposed to coexist with the council's right to legislate and pass laws, which often include numerous subjects, why should citizens be denied the same right to legislate on numerous subjects at once? Ballot initiatives are already limited in that they cannot pass laws that appropriate funds. Why should the power of citizens be even more limited to a single undefined subject? Finally, I disagree that an initiative should be required to wait 6 years if a majority of electors reject a measure. Just getting an initiative on the ballot requires at least 5% of the voters to sign the ballot access petition. If those same 5% sign again, why should their voices be silenced for 3 election cycles? If you're going to have this section, I think it should be a maximum of 1 election cycle they have to wait. In summary, this proposed legislation is bad for DC and bad for those who believe in direct democracy. This legislation should not be put to a vote. I welcome any questions you may have. And finally, and with regards to the ANC's vacancies, just pay them. It will get people not resigning as often if they just pay the ANC commissioners because they're doing a lot of work, and it's a thankless job if they're not getting paid. Thank you so much for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. It's Brazil. All right, okay, that is it. Mr. Klein, if you are still, is he with us? Mr. Schiller, thank you very much. I think I captured I have 4 points. Did you make 4 points in my notes? I just want to make sure I have everything. All right, okay. And I just wanted to add a point of reference. You mentioned that for ANCs, just pay them, just pay them. I tried to do that years ago, and believe it or not, when the ANC was in my committee, and it was a mixed bag. Some who had been long-term commissioners and felt this was an action of civic duty were very much against commissioners being paid. And then some new ones with childcare concerns, they wanted to be paid because they had that expense, that burden. So we worked out a compromise, but I hear what you're saying. And thank you for that comment. And it goes forward in thinking about how we can continue to modernize and put in place a system that works for us so that we have government at the lowest level of our communities so that everyone will have a place for voice and feel that their input matters. So thank you very much for that. I did want to ask you a question about, you mentioned something about the time frame in which an initiative must be before the public through, I guess, the petitioning process. Can you reiterate that? Help me understand your perspective. You mentioned 120 days versus 30 days.
Yeah, I'd be glad to talk that over with you. So under the current law, you have advisory opinions. They're required to be done within 15 days. Your initiative expands that to 30 days, so that adds 15 more days. The fiscal impact statement is required within 15 days. That doesn't change very much. Then you have the statutory 60 days with the 15 days notice. So that adds another 15 days where the board's determination meeting. Now, normally they have to have their hearing within 30 days of receipt, and now it's or 60 days of receipt. Then there's an objection period for the board's determination. That adds an additional 20 more days because it's currently 10, now it goes to 30. And then the board currently has 20 days after that to prepare the short title summary statement in legislative form. The Filter Act adds an additional 15 days because it says 30 days after publication with the 15 days notice, so that adds 10 to 15 more days. That's just for the ballot initiative. So in all, you're looking at about 30 to 40 days, actually about 60 to 90 days altogether for the current ballot initiative, while under the Filter Act, you're adding another potentially I think 60 more days. So you're looking at almost 120 to 180 days. With respect to the referendum process, that's even more concerning because, as we mentioned earlier, I was involved with the referendum number 8, which the issue at that hand was the board let us go forward to collect the signatures. I trained, over 250 people to go hit the streets. We collected 35,000 signatures in 6 days, scrambled to put the numbers on them, only to find out that the Board of Elections could receive them but didn't have to do anything with them. And what I learned out of the referendum process is that it's nearly impossible. The only time you can get a referendum passed in DC is when the council is not in session, or I'm sorry, when Congress is not in session, because the 30 legislative day review period only applies when Congress is in session. So it's really, you can only have a referendum in August, and that's about it. August, and maybe if you're lucky during the Christmas break on a year in which there's no congressional new congressional cycle. So the referendum process is already extremely flawed. In some ways, one way to actually make it better is that if someone goes forward and introduces legislative text for a referendum, it passes the proper subject determination, that the chairman sends notice to Congress to say that this legislation is paused until after the referendum goes forward. If the voters are able to collect enough signatures, that there's a prescribed amount of time, not this arbitrarily denoted like how many days Congress is in session, but once the proper subject has been determined for a referendum specifically, notice put to Congress saying, please put this review on pause for 60 days. So then if the electorate wants to put the brakes on a council action, they're given like a firm number of days that they can collect the signatures, not this, oh, I don't know how many days we're going to have. And I mean, it was brought up earlier that the Board of Elections wants to act fast on behalf of voters because they know that the window is so limited for the referendums. Under Filter, it makes it impossible. And I really recommend you remove that section entirely or change the days to be 5 or less to make sure that voters who want to challenge a law passed by your body, by the council, that they're able to do so with a prescribed number of days. Because right now it's this nebulous number, depending on if Congress is in session and if you can get the hearing. And if someone like Andrew Klein decides to challenge the public determination, then all of a sudden that referendum's failed, which is what just happened this week, that a referendum was timely filed and a challenge was issued and it failed. And now Initiative 82 is effectively repealed and overturned. And it's not cool because voters have passed that twice only to have the council turn around and say, you know what, we don't like that. And so with respect to the referendum process, there should be a prescribed number of days that voters or at least campaigns can be able to go forward and collect signatures. With respect to the initiative process, I don't really think too much needs to be changed as it is currently drafted. The requesting the fiscal impact statement on the petition is just something that's just onerous. I mean, I really was frustrated seeing that the fiscal impact statement couldn't really be challenged. Like, what's the process for a campaign to challenge what they believe to be a fiscal impact statement error, that the Office of Chief Financial Officer makes a mistake? Who has the ability to correct that mistake? And if it's being put on the ballot, I agree with that. I think that's a great idea personally, because it makes the point that you as a council member, you have a fiscal impact statement in hand before you cast your vote. And I think the voter should be afforded that same right as well. But to put it on the petition that's already 8.5 by 11, it's not a very big piece of paper, I'm sorry. And so you only have 5 lines, and then you add another 50-word summary statement for a fiscal impact, you're going to limit the amount of information that you can put on that petition. And so it doesn't really need to be there, because all laws ultimately cost money. The question really at the end of the day is, does this law appropriate funds? And I mean, we can have the applicability clause that's subject to appropriations, but with respect to Initiative A2, it didn't require any appropriations because it was all administrative. All they had to do was change this is how much workers get paid per hour. But when it comes to changing the functions of government, it's going to cost some money to implement the law. And we shouldn't be using the fiscal impact statement as a means to prevent this, because it used to not be required. It wasn't until 2020 where the council passed an amendment to the Initiative Amendment Act, or what is it, law? DC, the Initiative and Referendum Process Improvement Act, DC Law 23-192. That put the fiscal impact statement in the beginning of the ballot initiative process, not at the end or after it's even cleared to go before voters. So the reason, the rationale for putting the fiscal impact statement at the very beginning is to say, oh, don't sign this, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost taxpayer money, when in reality, all laws cost some money to implement, no matter which kind of law you're trying to change. And I don't really like the fact that there's going to be, fodder to say that, oh, no, see right here on this petition, that's why you shouldn't sign it. When I go out and engage voters, I say, you know what? You can be against this. By signing this petition, all you're doing is that you say you believe in the democratic process. You can still vote against this later on. But by signing this petition, you're telling the Board of Elections that you believe in the democratic process. That's simple.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving us more language and a greater understanding of your position on this. I must say that when we talk about dollars and cents, and that's what we talked about primarily in the proposed legislation, the issue for us is that the law for the District of Columbia is the Home Rule Act, and the powers that we have vested in us through congressional action. And it is very, very clear that the council are the appropriator of funds. Not every citizen within the domain of the District of Columbia, but the council. And while we are not a state, we do have that authority. And so it is therefore very important to understand what any measure that is put before any person within our domain is what it will cost. And so that is why, and I just wanted to put that on the record also, as you're talking at great length about the cost and where it should be. And thank you for indicating that you believe it's a good idea to have it on the ballot. Thank you very much for that. Anyone else? All right, we're able to move to our third panel. And let's see. Really, we're moving to our fourth panel. All right. Everyone here? All right, we have Caitlin Peter, Vice President from the AOBA, and Eric Jones, also a Vice President from AOBA, one for commercial and then multifamily, and then Sean Townsend as an individual, and Liz DeBarris, the CEO for DCBIA organization. Good morning and welcome. And we can start with Liz DeBarros.
Good morning, Councilmember Bonds and the committee and the staff. My name is Liz DeBarros. I am the CEO of the District of Columbia Building Industry Association, I'm also a proud resident of Ward 7. I am testifying today in support of the Fair Initiatives Lend Transparency to Every Resident Amendment Act of 2025. This bill would strengthen transparency and accountability in the ballot initiative process, ensuring that voters understand not only what is being voted on, but the full budgetary, fiscal, and/or administrative implications of any given initiative. At the outset, this bill would require that initiative summaries clearly and accurately describe the measure's purpose, mandate that petition materials include certified summary, and ensure signatures are collected from at least the 5 wards for broader participation. It also promotes transparency by requiring public posting of petition forms, summaries, and circulation requirements before initiatives reach the ballot. Further, the bill clarifies that each initiative may only address a single subject. This single subject rule prevents measures from combining unrelated policies into one vote, ensuring that voters can make a clear and informed decisions on each issue without confusion or risk of hidden provisions being bundled into a single measure. While the public can easily rally behind an initiative that appears beneficial to residents, such proposals often lack a full understanding of their implications, the unintended consequences they may create in other programs or funding priorities, and the reality that not every good idea is appropriate for a simple yes or no decision without deliberation or voter education on the complexities that are involved. Most critically, though, and to that point, the bill explicitly provides that if a proposed measure would create fiscal, budgetary, or administrative obligations, the fact must be disclosed or reflected in summary materials so that voters can evaluate the proposal properly. Voters deserve to know not only the concept behind the measure, but also the practical consequences, including any costs or administrative obligations it would create. Further, as you know, electors of the District of Columbia may propose laws, except laws appropriating funds. This much-needed bill addresses the framework to allow the council to retain its appropriation authority and ensure that initiatives do not commandeer and step into the shoes of duly elected council members by simply making initiatives subject to appropriation of funds. We believe this loophole is a deviation from the intent of the district charter. Finally, the legislation updates the timelines for the Attorney General and the council's general counsel to issue advisory opinions, extending that period from 15 days for initiatives and 5 days for referenda to 30 days. It also provides a 30-day period for both proposers and members of the public to object to the board's determinations or to the legislative summary in form of a measure. These changes ensure the initiative process allows adequate time for review and public input, reducing the likelihood of measures being overturned in litigation or reaching voters without a fully vetted impartial summary. In conclusion, the bill represents a thoughtful and necessary update to the district's initiative process. By requiring clear and accurate summaries, ensuring broad participation, enforcing the single subject rule, and providing transparency on the fiscal and administrative impacts, the bill strengthens voter understanding and safeguards the integrity of the process. It balances resident engagement with responsible governance, ensuring initiatives are properly vetted and aligned with the district budgetary and policy framework. For those reasons, DCBI strongly supports the passage of the legislation and urges the committee to move the bill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Sean Townsend, I believe, we actually will have Shay Rudell who will present testimony.
Good morning, Chair Bonds and committee members. Thank you very much this morning. The Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington thanks you for the opportunity to provide comment on the Fair Initiatives Act. RMW strongly supports this legislation as an important step towards protecting district residents from initiative abuse. The bill's requirements for fiscal impact statements, single subject restrictions, extended timelines for legal review, and a 6-year waiting period before a similar measure can return to the ballot represent meaningful reforms that will bring greater transparency and deliberation to the initiative process. Had these protections been in place in 2022, Initiative 82, which sought to eliminate the tip credit, just as Initiative 77 did 4 years earlier, would likely have never reached the ballot. District residents, including thousands of tipped workers whose earnings have since declined, would have been spared the damage. To be clear, the Fair Initiatives Act is about protecting DC residents. And we have to be very careful here. Our status as the nation's capital makes us a trophy for outside groups pursuing national agendas in very high-profile ways. The most recent initiatives demonstrate how these organizations exploit our ballot process to interfere in local politics and even overturn laws passed by our elected DC Council. The campaign to pass Initiative 82 and overturn the council's actions to protect the tip credit was bankrolled almost entirely by one organization whose $200K plus contribution made up 90% of that campaign's total budget. Initiative 83, which has been discussed this morning and established ranked choice voting, was largely funded by more than $500,000 in outside money from an organization in Colorado, and accounted for nearly 2/3 of that campaign's total donations. The campaigns market themselves as grassroots movements, but they are orchestrated thousands of miles away from any district homes. We support the right of citizens to propose laws, but that right should serve the interests of our community, not out-of-state organization using our home as a platform for national campaigns. The consequences of poorly vetted initiatives fall hardest on small businesses and working people. Since Initiative 82 took effect, layoffs and restaurant closures have climbed across the board, but nowhere has this downturn hit harder by mid-priced, everyday restaurants that serve middle-class families. Closures at these establishments have tripled in 3 years, and now middle-class restaurants account for 2/3 of this year's restaurant closures. RMW urges the council to pass this bill with the strongest possible protections for the district residents, ensuring that our ballot process serves the people who live and work here, not outside interests pursuing national agendas. Thank you, Chair Bonds, for introducing this important legislation. I welcome your questions, and as always, RMW is committed to working collaboratively towards solutions for the shared challenges of our community.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Eric Jones.
Good morning, Chairwoman Bonds and the members of the Committee on Executive Administration and Labor. My name is Eric J. Jones. I'm a fourth-generation Washingtonian, proud Ward 4 resident, and who has the honor of serving as the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Apartment Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington. Just a quick bit about my background. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a campaign lawyer, not a trained lawyer, not someone who has expertise in doing a lot of the work that we've heard people prognosticate about over the past few years. I'm a former campaign operative who's worked on campaigns in over 20 jurisdictions and who's run for office in the district. I'm a registered independent who, because of the ballot process that people say isn't flawed, was told by DC Board of Elections during Initiative 82 that I wasn't able to vote because it was supposed to take place during the primary ballot. Here's the problems that no one wants to talk about. I was someone who testified before the Board of Elections on Initiative 77 and pointed out that by increasing the minimum wage, you're increasing the Davis-Bacon wage standard, which by law has to be done. But that also creates a new negative fiscal impact that no one wants to talk about. One of the things no one talks about is the fact that there are national organizations whose goal and objective are to move ballot initiatives throughout the country. As someone who worked with the National Party and they trained tens of thousands of individuals on their behalf, I know this process because it's what I used to do for a living. I know the process that's taking place when these national bodies see DC as a low-hanging fruit, and they're using us as a petri dish to pass their national agendas. And then once they pass it, they walk back out of DC. And when they run those campaigns in every other jurisdiction, the first thing they say is it passed in the District of Columbia. If it was a good enough idea for the residents of the district, it's good enough for California. It's good enough for Texas. It's good enough for Nevada. I've been there. I've done that. I still have friends who raise money for it. We talked about Initiative 82. One of the lead organizers for Initiative 82 is one of my longtime friends who I call a big sister. She splits her time between her hometown in Louisiana and South Africa. She's lived in DC less than 20% of her entire 50-year life. But one of the things she told me is, DC's our next stomping ground. I remember the conversation. She called me and said, little bro, you all are up next. This is what we're getting ready to do. So when we talk about this, One of the things we talk about at AOBA often is, why are we constantly under attack? How can we stop the problems that we currently see? And unfortunately, the best thing we've seen in a very long time is this legislation. No one wants to talk about the fact that B26-0436 talks about dealing with the issues that are causing district residents to be taken advantage of by well-heeled, well-educated folks, mainly from outside the district, who come to the city to make a political point. It's time for us to actually protect DC residents, stand up for DC residents, and ensure that we're doing things that are in the best interest of the people who live, work, and play here. You stated earlier that my colleague is testifying as well, and she'll speak more to the details of some of the legislation. You also see that in my written statement. One of the reasons I'm here as our commercial VP is that many of the senior level folks who I represent on behalf of AOBA, who live in the city, many of which you were born in the city, you know what they can't do? They can't give a political contribution in the city that they call home. Not because they're a criminal, not because they've done anything wrong, but because some groups from outside the city decided that it was not in their best interest to allow them to make a donation to the individuals who represent them on their legislative body. They can't make a donation to their mayor. How democratic is that? That because of the job that I have or the job that my wife has, that I cannot make a political contribution. I can't make a contribution to the person who's lived down the street from me for 15 years who decided to run for office. Not because I'm trying to buy influence, but because they're my neighbor and I've known them. Our kids have grown up together. Here's the hypocrisy that the folks who talk about little d democracy don't talk about. They believe that the initiative and referendum process is great as long as you're agreeing with them. If we're talking about pure democracy, B26-0436 is exactly what we need. Why? Because it makes it fair for everyone. If it's good enough when we have the chance to win, it's also good enough when we have the chance to lose. It just has to be honest. There's no honesty and transparency in the process, and folks are using the district as their petri dish to make a statement that they then use everywhere else. This is not what we're here for. This is what we complain when Congress does to us now on the conservative level. The only way that we can ensure that district residents are having their fair shake is to stand up for us whether we win or lose. And that's what B26-0436 does. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, sir. Ms. Peters? She's not. All right. All right, so that is our panel 4. I want to thank the witnesses. Mr. Barris, thank you so much for talking about the practicality of Bill 465. I don't know if there's any examples that you might want to put forth of how onerous the current process you found it to be, or if you have any additional comments, I'll give you a moment if you want to add to that. I really don't have any questions. I think you covered the process that we are endeavoring to address through the legislation.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to make comments here. We do see, we just had a rent freeze, a ballot initiative get on the ballot just at the end of last month, and it's just labeled as rent freeze, but it actually impacts the entire industry. It could actually upend the real estate development industry. It provides a 2-year rent freeze on residential units. It freezes. It automatically increases rent based on inflation. It also changes, adds 2 and 3 bedrooms requirements, and all that is great and good goals to have for the city, but it also requires a lot of funding. It requires a long process to build home units. You know, as you know, we're in a housing crisis. You've been the chair of the housing committee, and you are very familiar with these issues. So having just an up and down vote on a ballot is doesn't allow the transparency necessary, I think, to give the average voter the opportunity to be able to vote on something. So I think that's going through the process now, and I think this legislation that is in front of us will help bring some clarity and allows the council to do what it needs to do to have council hearings on important matters where you can hear from not only the real estate industry but the public as well, as we address this housing crisis across the city. So appreciate you introducing this bill, and we fully support it.
Thank you very much for your additional input. Mr. Rudell, is there anything you want to add? I know that as a member of the body concerned with our restaurant association, the recent court decision does affect your industry. I didn't know if you might want to add something pertaining to that so we would have it on the record.
Thank you, Chair Bonds. As you noted, we did have a good outcome at the courts this week. However, proponents for eliminating the tip wage have been, really have been very forward about announcing their plans to put forward yet another ballot initiative. And I think, democracy only works when everybody gives up a little bit. And I think the ballot initiative process really precludes that. And the work that the DC Council did this summer is a great example where they created a compromise, right? We brought the tip credit to 75% over 10 years of what minimum wage is, which would be one of the highest tip wages in the country. DC has one of the highest minimum wages in the country. So you just kind of have to scratch your head, like, why are we having this conversation here again and again? And I think you have to look at the fact that when you do this in the district, you make national and international headlines.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that additional input. Mr. Jones, thank you very much for your personalizing this initiative experience. I have to ask you, you mentioned your colleague who I believe is a resident of the district, but found some peculiarity in trying to participate in the process of voting in the district. Did I hear you correctly?
No, so just really quickly, so several of our members on the commercial side have what are deemed contracts with the district, whether it's contracts based on how they do zoning, other items, and some of them have been given legal opinions that they're unable to make a contribution to someone they want to vote for. So, for example, at one point, a member of the council lived down the street from me. In my previous role, my job had a contract with the city to provide workforce development training because we were experts in doing that. And right before I left that job is when we received that contract. I technically was not able for about a year to make a donation to a member of the city council. Not because I did something wrong, not because I did something problematic. The organization I worked for had a contract to provide workforce development training, something we had an expertise in, we did already. And because of that contract that they were going to probably look to renew, which they ended up not renewing, I was unable to give a donation to the person who lived down the street from me who was running for city council. Nothing more. I have members who I represent now who are in similar situations, and people keep on talking about we're taking away democracy, but these are the things that are okay because people don't think it's problematic because it doesn't impact them.
All right, so you're talking to us about a provision which the Office of Campaign Finance enforces with the assistance from the, I think it's the Department on Small Businesses that must inform the Office of Campaign Finance of businesses that have a contract with the local government. and that's where there is a restriction. Is that
Yeah.
what we're talking about?
Yes, and the reason I brought it up is because many of the folks who actually promote and propose these referendums actually have contracts that are voted on by the district. One of which is every organized labor group here in the district has a contract by and large that goes before the city council. But because they're organized labor, they're not deemed a business, they're deemed a 501c7 organization. They're able to fully fund referendums, fund candidates, make donations, and it's fine. But because they're not deemed a business or a business owner, they're able to do so. This is what I mean by if it's good enough for us when we have the chance to win, it should be good enough when we have the chance to lose. Referendums should be open and honest. It shouldn't be, well, what do you do for a living? What's your educational background? It should be about giving residents the opportunity to make a clear and conscientious vote on an issue, not a whole bunch of issues stamped together, but an issue that's important. And that's what you're trying to do here, in my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for that clarification and pointing out the value of having everyone who is in our jurisdiction the opportunity to cast a ballot. Thank you so much. Our next panel, we have Shinyeti Hubbard, who is President and CEO of the DC Chamber of Commerce, Brandon Scott, who is with the Association of Realtors. He is the Vice Chair of the Public Policy Committee. Frank Snodgrass, who is also with the Association of Realtors, and Sam Bonner. All right. We tried to get Ms. Peter on. If you accept you have to accept the panelist link and we could bring you on. We'd love to have your statement as well. We'll give you a second to see if you can accept the link so we can get your statement as well, Ms. Peter, from AOBA. Nothing. All right, we're going to move right along with the president and CEO of the DC Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Hubbard, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Bonds. Good morning. Good morning, committee staff and members. My name is Shinyeti Hubbard, and I serve as president and CEO of the DC Chamber of Commerce, proud native Washingtonian and Ward 4 resident. On behalf of our 1,000 members across all 8 wards, employers large and small, thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding B26-0436. The DC Chamber offers its strong support for the Fair Initiatives Lend Transparency to Every Resident Amendment Act of 2025. This legislation represents a crucial first step toward bringing needed transparency and meaningful opportunities for timely stakeholder input to the district's initiative and referendum processes. We believe the bill addresses 4 of the most critical gaps in the current legal regime governing these processes. First, the legislation requires the Office of the Chief Financial Officer to issue a timely fiscal impact statement before the Board of Elections issues a determination on whether a proposed measure is proper subject matter for a ballot initiative. The bill will also require publication of the fiscal impact statement and inclusion of the measure's cost on the petition sheet and on the ballot that voters will see on Election Day. And just as fiscal impact statements have long accompanied pending legislation before the council, these requirements strike us as not only sensible, but also essential. It is both unfair and fiscally irresponsible to ask voters to weigh in on a ballot initiative without an informed estimate of its cost. Second, the bill requires each proposed initiative to present a single subject to voters for their consideration. As you noted in your letter introducing this bill, most states that allow citizen ballot initiatives now limit them to a single subject. As many observers have noted, ballot initiatives often risk reducing complex policy decision-making to binary yes or no ballot box decisions without the opportunity for clarification or amendment. To avoid confusion, voters should at the very least be afforded the right to consider one subject per initiative. Third, the legislation extends the period for issuing advisory opinions from the DC Attorney General and the General Counsel of the DC Council from 15 days for initiatives and 5 days for referenda to 30 days for each. This additional time should allow those offices to undertake a more thoughtful, thorough, and less rushed review. Notably, the bill also provides both measure proposers and members of the public additional time to object to the board's refusal to accept a measure or object to the form of a measure from 10 days to 30 days. We regularly hear anecdotal reports from district voters eager to weigh in on a given initiative or referendum, but unable to meet the current 10-day deadline for either. Finally, the bill prohibits the filing of initiative measures that are substantially similar to previous measures that have appeared on the ballot within the last 6 years. This would end the recurring practice of filing redundant ballot measures every election cycle, even though voters had rejected the same or nearly the same measure in a recent election. While we support allowing district voters to consider ballot initiatives during regular election cycles, we are not convinced that proposers should be able to repeatedly refile measures that district voters recently rejected. The Chamber also has broader concerns about current trends in the local initiative process. In recent years, we've seen prevailing initiative filings that have been predominantly spearheaded and funded by well-organized, deep-pocketed out-of-state interests seeking to use the nation's capital as a test case for social and economic policy changes. It has been reported that Initiative 82, governing tipped wages, has had a devastating impact on the health of our hospitality sector, resulting in the closure of many locally owned and operated restaurants, bars, and clubs. And Initiative 83 has codified a complicated scheme governing local voting, resulting in the most significant change in how district voters are tabulated and awarded in generations. It is my understanding that both initiatives were organized and financed by outside organizations seeking to advance broader policy goals that may not be in the best interest of the district or its residents. Finally, it is vital to keep the bigger picture in mind. Ballot initiatives and referenda offer none of the safeguards for give and take embedded in the DC Council's legislative process. These include procedures that guarantee the public, including those with considerable subject matter expertise, the right to weigh in on legislation through on-the-record verbal and written testimony, as well as opportunities throughout the process for formal deliberation among elected members to strike compromises and amend bills. The Chamber will continue to support the right of proposers, whether they reside here or elsewhere, to organize and fund efforts bringing proposed law changes up for consideration by district voters. But we also believe that the bill offers a set of reasonable protections that will serve to safeguard the ballot initiative and referendum processes, ultimately making them more open, deliberative, and fair. For all these reasons, we urge the committee to move expeditiously to advance this bill to the full council. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now hear from Brandon Scott, I believe.
Good morning, Chair Bonds. My name is Brandon Scott, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Public Policy Committee for the DC Association of Realtors, or DCAR. I'm also a resident of Ward 7 and a professional realtor at Keller Williams Capital Properties. DCAR is the district's state association of realtors and serves as the premier voice of real estate in DC. Our mission is to advocate, protect, and promote the interests of our approximately 3,000 members and their clients who live and work in every ward of our city. Now, through our advocacy, we represent every real estate professional, small housing providers, homeowners, and renters. Now, so I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Frank Snowgrass. Now, Councilmember Bonds, before I turn to the legislation, I want to thank you on behalf of our entire industry for your leadership in stabilizing the housing market and helping our smallest housing providers maintain naturally affordable housing in the district. Now, unfortunately, much of that progress we have made together can be at risk if the Board of Elections or the Council does not stop the ongoing abuse of the ballot initiative process. Now, to that end, we are here to support the FAIR Initiative's Lend Transparency to Every Resident Amendments Act of 2025. Now, I'll speak to the value of the bill's requirement that ballot initiatives be on a single subject, and my colleague will discuss the need for greater transparency around fiscal costs and the adequate time for legal review. Now, in the last election cycle, voters were confronted by a ballot initiative that asked them to vote on both ranked choice voting and open primaries in a single initiative. Each of these issues is controversial, and DC residents were stripped of the ability to support one policy and not the other. The council made the choice by funding half the initiatives. Now, based on that precedent, a potentially catastrophic omnibus ballot initiative has been proposed that includes at least 6 different subjects. While it was withdrawn due to illegal provisions, an updated version has been filed. Now, if approved by the Board of Elections, voters would have to parse through 6 pages of dense legislative text that dramatically impacts the Housing Production Trust Fund, inclusionary zoning, and the disposition of public property. And most critically, to highlight, it would make it impossible for small housing providers to maintain their properties by freezing the rent where their costs are the highest. Voters cannot disentangle such a complicated proposal. Unlike council members, they cannot negotiate the details. They do not have their own staff research. They do not have a committee to review the bills, and they cannot offer amendments. They walk into a voting booth and they are expected to vote yes or no on the entire package. The ballot initiative makes it obvious that allowing giant, multi-subject omnibus initiatives on the ballot is unworkable and must be halted immediately. Now, our voters deserve our respect, and respecting the will of the voters means asking them to decide on one issue at a time, ensuring that they have the benefit of quality, independent financial and legal analysis to make their decision, and not asking them to do the job of elected officials. Your bill would advance those goals, and we support it and hope you can put these common sense reforms into effect as soon as possible. And I would like to thank you, Councilmember Bonds, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Thank you for your testimony. Mrs. Snodgrass, we will take your testimony now.
Good morning, Chair Bonds. My name is Frank Snodgrass, and I'm a member of the Public Policy Committee for the DC Association of Realtors. I'm also a resident of Ward 2 and Vice President of TTR Sotheby's International Realty. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. As my colleague mentioned, I am here to support the Filter Act of 2025. I'm a voter here in DC, and I have seen all the ballot initiatives over the last several years. Like many district residents, I pay close attention to public policy to stay informed. Even so, I and many voters are not given all the information we need to truly evaluate every ballot initiative. When the council votes on a bill, you aren't just deciding whether you like a policy or not. You weigh the potential benefits of the policy against the costs. For large and impactful bills, in addition to an analysis of the fiscal impact on the district government, you sometimes receive an economic analysis as well. That's how you make seasoned, reasoned decisions. Voters don't get those tools. Now we are facing a catastrophic omnibus ballot initiative that would cripple our housing market and drastically reduce housing production. So, now more than ever, we need to make sure voters are presented with the true costs of a policy. I recommend, Councilmember Bonds, that in addition to the fiscal analysis, you add a requirement that ballot initiatives also require an economic analysis be prepared by the Council Budget Office or the Office of the Chief Financial Officer as well before an initiative goes on the ballot. This would ensure that voters have as much information as you do for large bills. Finally, Chair Bonds, the current law provides the Office of the Attorney General and your General Counsel with far too little time for a robust legal analysis of proposed initiatives. And further, If either office misses an issue in their legal review, district residents don't have enough time to effectively challenge those issues in court. Voters deserve to be presented with legislation that has been thoroughly reviewed by legal experts and that does not violate the Constitution or the Home Rule Charter. To be clear, if you're going to ask us as voters to decide difficult policy issues in the ballot box, we need the benefit of clear, neutral information on the financial costs of the policy and its likely impact on our economy. We also need confidence that the language has been reviewed and will have the impact we expect. To get there, we need ballot initiative reform. That's why we are here to ask you to move forward your legislation, put it into effect as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair Bonds. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Snodgrass. We'll now hear from Mr. Bonaire.
Hey, this is Sam Bonner. My internet is not so great, so I think I'm gonna stay off camera here so you can hear me. Thank you, Councilmember Bonds, for hosting this. I'm excited to testify about the Filter Act, but I am generally opposed. Democracy is essential. Yes, we want it to be about representative and electing our council members, but we also want it to be expanded, to be about economic democracy, where folks have a say in the organizations and with the money that's involved. And we also want direct democracy, which is what a ballot initiative is. We should allow for space for changes that the council members don't like, even if they're complicated, like banning stock trading or outside of employment or how we vote. If they're not willing to do it, we need to leave open space for the people to be able to do it themselves. And with some of these changes, you would essentially be banning the people from being able to make changes to how they vote. I'm open to some parts of this legislation. More public input is great, but as some have suggested, maybe we would instead have a process where people could put amendments or tweaks or even splitting the different parts of an initiative as two different questions on the ballot. So there are ways that you could adjust the process to allow for some of these concerns, but we don't really need this endless political campaign process, more signatures, and as you say, outside funding requirements. More endless hurdles. There's so many veto points and roadblocks and steps to actually get something on the ballot and to actually have it be successful. Super open also to the cost being on the ballot or the fiscal impact statement. Want this to happen before the legal determination because the idea legal determination is an appropriate, the appropriations conversation is a legal determination. So this concept of whether something appropriates funds has continually been expanded over the years, and it's already such a high barrier. And it's created these weird dynamics where, we can legalize marijuana, but we're not actually able to regulate it. This creates huge issues, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Things always cost something, but we don't want this cost to functionally kill the voters' ability to change something about the way the city functions. There was a recent initiative, I'm not sure whether it's going to succeed, but on daylight savings time, it isn't appropriating funds at all, but it costs 20 millions to do. So, that itself is a problem if we're going to change the way that the process flows. Finally, I'll say that the legislation to be effective, as I hear so much from council members, it needs to be holistic, balanced, and sometimes touch on a few different parts of the code. We heard a recent debate about the curfew. It's not enough if we don't also create youth recreation opportunities. I think it's important to have that in a proposed ballot initiative. I would say that this is a solution in search of the problem. The council has never had an issue coming in to adjust, tweak, regulate, not fund, or even overturn initiatives. You still have this power without doing any of the process of the Filter Act. Even if there is a fiscal impact, you can and have eagerly done so to adjust it, look at it, amend it to make sure that the council is the final appropriator. That is still the case. But the people sometimes, once, maybe twice every 2 years, get to be a legislator. Do not take that away or weaken this even more, such that the only, the most well-connected and experienced folks are able to navigate this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, sir. I think each of our presenters in this panel have been very clear as to their position. I had a few questions, but I think you pretty much answered anything that I would like to put on the record as it relates to the proposal in 26-0436. But I will ask, I want to make sure we all are saying the same thing as it relates to the issue of how do we finance any initiative that is proposed and passes through our voting process. So do you believe it's important for a member of the public to know how much something costs before they cast a vote, particularly when the matter will be paid through tax resources? And so I'll ask each of the panelists if they would respond to that. And I'll start with you, Sam, if you would.
Very open to it being on the ballot. Absolutely. I would say less open to it coming out before the legal determination. But being on the ballot, I think that's to have an essence.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Snodgrass, you would give us your response, please?
Yes. I think voters should know the cost of an initiative.
All right, thank you. Mr. Scott?
Yes, Chair Bonds. I can concur with everyone else that everyone should have an idea of what the cost of an initiative should be.
Thank you. And of course, President Hubbard will take your comment as well, please.
Yes, thank you so much for introducing this bill. And I agree with my colleagues on this panel. Transparency and accountability are critical, and we should have cost estimates before initiatives go on the ballot so voters are clear on what they're voting for.
Thank you very much. And I singled out this provision in the proposed legislation because this has been the tripping point for how do we make real any decision that the public has made, and it all costs dollars and cents. So thank you very much. Thank you again to this panel. And we'll move to, I think it's our final panel. Okay, and let's see. Me and my papers. Right. Everyone here? No. All right, and this is first. All right, we have Valerie Torres, who needs to accept the link, please. And then Valerie
I'm
Graham.
here.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. And Ross Cohn.
Present.
Thank you. And Chris Furnish.
Here.
All right, thank you. So we got a team here. All right, Ms. Torres, we will start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon, committee chair, Bonds, and members of the committee, or I guess they're not there. Thank you for listening to my testimony today. I am Valerie Torres. I'm here today to share my concerns about the district's current ballot initiative process, express my strong support for the FAIR initiatives, lend transparency to every resident amendment act. First, I want to thank you, Chairperson Bonds, for introducing this bill and bringing this issue forward. It's something that I think has been a real concern for myself and many of my colleagues, coworkers, and friends who work in the industry, in the service industry. Reforming this flawed system is long overdue. I won't pretend to understand the full gamut of how the process is, but what I do know is that the ones that have impacted my livelihood, namely Initiative 7782, these have been misleading initiatives that have really impacted my livelihood and my income and my industry, and they have been able to get on the ballot over and over again. And clearly there needs to be some sort of reform that addresses this issue. To be honest, I feel like we've been here many times. For the better part of 8 years, I've had to testify repeatedly before this committee and also the full council against initiatives 877 and 82 as a veteran tipped employee. Each time I feel like we are in Groundhog's Day. Like, I feel like we have always come saying the same exact things over and over again. We are here to preserve tip credit and protect our livelihoods. And we just have to keep coming back and doing it. And frankly, it's exhausting. We aren't, I've said it time and again, we aren't seasoned political activists. We're not political operatives. We're not part of any political operation, our organization. We're not being paid. We don't have political agendas. We are simply trying to fight for our industry, for our livelihoods. And we are fighting against special interest groups that people brought up already today, claiming that they're fighting for the workers, which they do not. They have the ability to push harmful initiatives onto the ballot repeatedly because the current system allows them to do so without almost any barriers. We saw it again with the most recent effort to overturn the Initiative 82 amendment passed this summer, and now they're preparing to do it again next year. So we're here again, and once again, myself and other coworkers and other colleagues, including the several people who are going to be testifying after me, will have to take time off of work. We have to endure stress and anxiety of testifying. Said many times, this gives me high anxiety speaking in public and testifying about this. And then also to deal with the harassment, yelling, even threats from those who push these initiatives. And it is overwhelming. And it happens all the time, all because a national political organization with no real ties to DC can propose the same or nearly identical measures over and over again without impunity, without consequence, while the Board of Elections continues to allow these efforts to move forward despite existing regulations. These are real life consequences to bring forward that are happening because of these ballots. The toll that it's taken on us is enormous. For me personally, repeatedly testifying, taking time off of work, meeting with council members, speaking at gatherings, dealing with those hostile individuals has really created a significant emotional psychological strain on me. With yet another initiative threatening the tip credit and on the horizon and looming over us, I am dreading having to go through this process again. I don't know how much fight I have left in me. I'm tired, I'm worn down, discouraged, and I continue to do so. I continue to fight because I believe in this industry and I believe in the people who make it work. But our voices are constantly being drowned out by national organizations that don't represent us, and they're able to come back here over and over again because this ballot initiative process is flawed. There have been other witnesses have testified to the real life consequences that have been happening because IDID 82 was passed. There are people who've lost their jobs, businesses closing across the city, across our industry. People have been suffering because of it. These complex, nuanced issues, especially those with enormous economic consequences, should not be decided through a yes/no ballot initiative with minimal transparency. These decisions belong with the legislators who can weigh in the facts, give stakeholders, consider what is best for the district's residents and workers and the economy. At bare minimum, there should be, as many people have said, there should be a lot more transparency as to what the ballot is actually addressing. The current system is being abused and people are being harmed as a result. Workers, business owners, and broader community, the ballot initiative process must be improved. For these reasons, I strongly support the Fair Initiatives Amendments Act. Thank you for hearing my testimony and for taking this urgent matter under advisement. And again, thank you for your time, Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now hear from Ms. Graham. I believe she's here. Okay.
Okay. Hi.
All right,
Can
we
you
got
can
you
you hear me?
now. Okay.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit hoarse, so bear with me. Thank you, Chairperson Bonds, for working to address the challenges of our current initiative process. Your proposed legislation is a necessary attempt to rein in a process that is out of control. It is certainly not a solution in search of a problem. As we have seen through Initiative 77, 82, and others, the initiative process has the potential to create chaos for residents, workers, and business owners in the District of Columbia. We have experienced the infiltration of our democratic process by a well-funded outside advocacy group that uses their significant resources to manipulate and mislead voters in matters that have far-reaching impacts on the restaurant community. While involving voters in democracy has value, it is not appropriate for voters influenced by single issue advocacy organizations to enact complex economic policy. Requiring an independent impact study is essential to determining whether or not an initiative is appropriate to place in front of the voters. We watched as the will of the voters rhetoric was weaponized against the council's deliberative process. Sorry, I'm reading from my notes. We expect our legislators on the council with the advice of subject experts and input from voters to deliberate over legislation. Policy has serious consequences, and it should be challenging to get an initiative on the ballot. The proposal to limit measures to a single subject addresses part of the challenge, but does not go far enough. The ballot wording for Initiative 77 was confusing and misleading and gave the impression that voters were deciding to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which was already established as law. Voters were asked to decide on a ballot measure that proposed 3 separate policy questions, one of which was already a law, through a yes or no vote. This is not how the nation's capital should be developing policy. The power of the initiative should not be the same as the power of the council. The voters do not have the same resources or expertise to vet initiatives. Prohibiting the reintroduction of the same proposal within a 6-year time frame is also really important. At the moment, we are subject to the constant imposition of an outside organization's attempts to circumvent council legislation. They seem to have unlimited resources to collect signatures and wage far-reaching campaign PR campaigns to influence the voters. This is not sustainable. I am very much in support of the Filter Act that you have proposed. It's long overdue. The abuse of the initiative system is creating serious consequences for residents, workers, and business owners. And we depend on the council to exercise your responsibility to make policy that best serves us in the district. And I think that the Filter Act really helps to protect the voters against the abuse of the initiative process. Thank you so much for taking the time to give voice, giving us an opportunity to speak, and really being thoughtful about how we can address this problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Graham. We'll now hear from Ross Cohn, I believe.
Hello.
All right, thank you. Go right ahead.
Hi, Councilmember Bonds and staff. I really appreciate your time today. My name is Ross Cohn. I am working in the hospitality industry in Ward 1 for the past 13 and a half years. And I gotta say, I am a big fan of B26-0436, fair initiatives, lend transparency to every resident. Dealing with I-77, very frustrating when looking at the ballot. I felt it was misleading. It wasn't acknowledging the current rights that we had as workers. Going to the I-77 repeal, the second longest standing council session. Those who are affected by this, who live in this industry, you saw the numbers. You saw where we were at the end of the night. We're used to these hours. We could tell you where we worked, where we're from, how long we've been doing this. And just seeing this repeat with I-82. We're tired. We've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes it just feels like it's a back and forth fight. So I am a very big fan of this going through. As a tipped worker, I have been affected by this. My friends, they're not even friends anymore. They're family to me. We show up for those important days. We spend holidays together, and we have been severely affected by this in our wages. And it is something that's been out of our control, led by a group that doesn't reside in the city. Once they pass their bill here, they go to another city. They want to say they're here for us. They're here for the community, but it's just their campaign method. And even when trying to meet with them with having better terms for amendments to I-82, they didn't want to hear them out. It's their way or the highway. And I just want to say I'm very thankful for this going through, and thank you very much for your time and hearing my experience.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Chris Furnish?
Hi, good afternoon.
Great.
Hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairwoman Bonds and other members of the council. Thanks for the chance to speak. My name is Chris Furnish, and I'm here today to oppose the Fair Initiatives Lend Transparency to Every Resident Amendment Act of 2025. So on the surface, this bill sounds like it's about transparency and fairness, but in reality, it would make it harder for regular DC residents to bring issues to the ballot. And I personally see that as a problem, as I've worked on many ballot initiatives in the city. DC has had a system that lets everyday people propose laws or challenge laws through ballot initiatives and referendums. And this process was created because DC residents don't have full voting rights in Congress, and this is one way to give us more control over our own government. This new bill would change that system by adding more rules, more reviews, and more steps before a ballot initiative is even allowed to move forward. And some say it's about preventing improper measures, but in practice, it would slow things down and give government offices more power to block or delay proposals. It would also make it harder for grassroots community groups to participate. Big, well-funded groups can hire lawyers and work through those hurdles. Regular people can't. And I think that's the real danger here, is a process that's supposed to empower residents could end up shutting them out. And if the goal is truly to make things clearer for voters, there are better ways to do that, like improving plain language explanations on the ballot, or even including the legislative text on the voter guides. We could fund, the Board of Elections more, give them more staff so they can do their job faster. I don't believe we need to make the process more complicated to make it more transparent, because direct democracy should be accessible, not something you need a lawyer to navigate. And DC residents deserve the tools that let us make our voices heard, especially in a city that still doesn't have full representation at the federal level. This bill weakens those tools instead of strengthening them. And for those reasons, I urge the council to oppose the bill or rewrite it so it protects rather than limits the public's ability to bring forward ballot initiatives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Furnish. Is that all right? I just have a excuse me. I just have a few questions. Ms. Furnish, you mentioned that this, in your testimony, this process was created because DC residents don't have full voting rights in Congress. You know, this process, the initiative process, exists in a good number of other parts of the country where there are states. So I don't think that this is accurate in thinking that because DC residents don't have full voting rights in Congress, that an initiative process would be created through, so help me understand your understanding of the initiative process, which, if I'm not mistaken, is somewhat guaranteed through the United States Constitution, and that includes the whole nation.
Well, to be clear, only 24 states, which is less than half of the United States, have the ability to do ballot initiatives. And
So this was not created to give us some access because we don't have full voting rights in Congress, I would think.
But it's part of why it exists in the first place.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate very much receiving your testimony. Thank you. And all right, I'm sorry, we actually have one last witness. Mr. Dylan Curtis is available. Mr. Curtis, we'll take your testimony right now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to hear me today. I think that this is an important legislation for helping to at least try to fix our ballot initiative process. I think we've seen in recent years the way that the process can be abused. You know, obviously through Initiative 77, Initiative 82. The way we repeatedly essentially had the same thing shoved down our throats and abusing having multiple facets of a ballot initiative that make it more confusing for voters. That was one that was plain to see in Initiative 77. It's a little frustrating as a longtime DC resident to see this process abused the way it has been. And I think this is an important step towards fixing that. I would also like to add that I think having a more comprehensive review for the impact fiscally of ballot initiatives is important. And I think including the feedback of individual departments within the city that actually have to handle the enforcement or the execution of these ballot initiatives is a very important part of doing this, because as we've seen this year, Congress can really throw a wrench in DC's budget process. And dealing with unknown fiscal impacts of ballot initiatives like this is kind of a reckless way to govern. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much else to add, but I do appreciate the time and listening to me on this matter.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we want all of our witnesses to have their opportunity to add to the record, and thank you for doing that, sir. At this point, it is opportunity for us to, one, thank all of our public witnesses, and to now hear from our government witness. Our government witness today is Kent Bose, who is the Executive Director of the Office on ANCs. And so if you will come forward to the witness table, we would like to swear you in and get you set up. All right. Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that your testimony and any statements that you make before us today to be truthful and complete?
I do.
Thank you. And you have been joined by your trustee staffer. If you will state your name for the record.
Denise Victor, General Counsel for the Office of ANCs.
Thank you very much. All right.
All right. Presuming I should go forward? Okay. I've decided as I've been listening to testimony this morning that I'm not necessarily going to read what I've submitted for the record verbatim. I think there's a lot more that needs to be addressed, but just to outline for those who may not have seen it, I believe I started by providing some of the history, which I think is important to what we're talking about today with regards to B26-0435, which is the Board of Elections Certification of ANC Vacancies Amendment Act of 2025. I think it's helpful for us to know where we've come from and know that what's being proposed today isn't necessarily just something that's been thrown out, right? Like for the first 15 years of ANCs, they appointed the filling of vacancies. So that's where we started. Following that from, I believe, 1991 through 1997, the Board of Elections actually did fill vacancies. And I think it's interesting in looking at the board's previous service, when they started filling vacancies, they even conducted elections for single candidate elections. And very quickly, I'd say within 6 months, they successfully lobbied to or advocated to the council that should be removed and they should just appoint because of citing cost. And I think that that's something the board continually brings up. And so then from 1997 until I'd say about the end of 2022, we had a process that worked reasonably well. The authority to conduct these elections went back to the advisory neighborhood commissions. And there was no other requirement that the election would be concurrent with a public meeting. I know, I feel like we both know this, but I wanted to make sure that people who don't know this history know this history. I mean, I recognize as a former commissioner yourself, and even before that, working with Mayor Barry to be the lead liaison with the commissions, you know this history. But there's a couple of things that broke the process, and I'm deeply concerned that the process as it currently stands actually is not a process. And I question if any of the vacancies that have been filled by election in the last 3 years are actually valid or could be contested in any way. Because currently there is no one officially designated to conduct elections for ANCs when there's more than one candidate. The two things that broke this are the Elections Modernization Amendment Act of 2022, which put into the statute a requirement of a minimum for 4 hours for an election. I mean, that sounds reasonable. The problem is, God willing, no ANC meeting lasts for more than 4 hours. Well, you would hope they don't last for more than 4 hours, which means that, I mean, ANCs, as you know, meet in the evenings, usually 7 o'clock in the evening. If they were required to have a 4-hour meeting, that's going at least until 1 in the morning, which is, no one's going to do that. And so this means that 4-hour requirement has now forced these elections to be on weekends, predominantly Saturday and Sunday. That does have conflicts with people's observance of their faith. We've had that come up. The other thing that broke all of this is the pandemic. So what that did to all of this is it now no longer, like commissions used to meet in public, like in person, in physical spaces. They are no longer required to do that. They may meet virtually. Many of them do meet virtually. Some of them may meet in a hybrid fashion. Some may only meet in person 4 times a year. So that means that there's no place designated where people can reasonably come. And I bring all this up as a problem because when you look closely at the statute, this is where we kind of have problems. So with the 4-hour window, if you look in the statute, it says, again, there's requirements assigning duties, and one of those is ballot counting shall be facilitated by at least 2 representatives of the OANC. That's fine. And the results shall be read aloud at the conclusion of the selected time period by the chairperson of the Advisory Neighborhood Commission. That sounds good so far. By such commissioner as the chairperson shall designate, or in the event that the office of chairperson is vacant, and here's the kicker, or there are no commissioners present by the presiding commissioner at the next regularly scheduled meeting. Well, if no commissioners are even required to be at the election, there is no meeting, there is no authority. You cannot assign that duty to the commissions because by statute, they don't even have to be present. And so, you know, we've had these conversations, as you've known, we've been before you, this committee, and other issues related to the board. I would say that if no one is designated officially to conduct the elections, then it goes over to 1-30909, where it says conduct of elections. A, the board is authorized to conduct elections. Now, the board will point to the DCMR. I think that's fine. The problem with the rules that they have put into the regulations are they predate the Modernization Act of 2022, and they predate the change in the law that allows ANCs to meet virtually. Therefore, they are in conflict with current statute. I noticed that when the Modernization Act of 2022 went into effect, there was a whole, the Board of Elections did a significant amount of updating to the regulations to make sure that they were compliant with the regulations. They didn't touch this section at all. It wasn't amended, it wasn't considered, it was just assumed that the responsibility was still with the commissions, and it is not. So I share that for your consideration. Now, with some of the things that I've heard today, I do firmly believe that we have a crisis right here today, and the whole system's broken. I laud you tackling this and trying to find a solution. I think it's also important to understand perhaps the lay of the land. We're talking about 3, 4 elections a year, maybe 5 in a busy year. That's not a tremendous amount of special elections. When I look at vacancies that occur following the November election, this year, or at least to date this year, there have been 17 vacancies. The reason why we have those vacancies, and that you're never going to solve this, 11 were created because the commissioner moved out of their SMD. You can't force a commissioner never to move in 2 years. It happens. 2 were due to illness. I would love everyone to be healthy for many, many years. Sometimes health is not your friend. 3 were unable to fulfill their obligations. I don't know the circumstances between 2 of those, but I do know with one of them, the commissioner works for the federal government in an agency that was perfectly fine with them being a commissioner until this administration came in and said he couldn't do it anymore. He was forced to resign due to his job. Can't solve that. And one actually didn't give a reason. But I think it's helpful for us to understand the background of what's going on. Something else that I think is very telling. I think it's also helpful for us to know how many vacancies we actually have. So from the beginning of this year to present, or till the end of the fiscal year, there were 9 SMDs that have been vacant for the entirety. Like, no one is interested in picking up a petition. No one is interested in serving. I thought Commissioner Edwards made an excellent point that maybe the council can appoint someone to fill. I think putting something into the statute that, like, regardless of how you want this to work on a day-to-day basis, that should a vacancy, like, should an SMD be vacant for more than 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, choose the term, that the council member from that ward will facilitate finding a candidate to fill that vacancy. I also would put in a little plug here too, that sometimes the perpetual vacancies we have are because we're a little bit more creative with redistricting than we ought to be. I've seen past redistricting say, well, you know, we really need to have someone on the ANC that represents Bolling Air Force Base. But no one at Bolling Air Force Base is interested or even knows what an ANC is. So the SMD is perpetually vacant. A problem we have with the SMD that's almost entirely the DC jail is it also has a shelter. I don't disagree with how we currently, how that vacancy is conducted, but there's a wrinkle in there that historically, or at least in the last couple of special elections, finding out if there's any registered voters at the shelter has been almost impossible. And the outreach is minimal. There's a flaw in that process. Trying to think if there's, so anyway, you know, I'm not going to be here today to strongly advocate for having full-fledged elections or having appointments. I see pros and cons with both of them, and I'm happy to work with the committee and the board to find a workable solution. What I will say is I think it is a very real concern that should be addressed is if the commission itself is choosing the replacement, are there any political pressures that may be put on them that make it a little bit more uncomfortable than it ought to be? I don't know, but it's valid. We should look at it. If there are elections, if we decide to go down that road, I think it's helpful to understand that even if the bar were as low as it is for our involvement, there's very little cost. Yes, there's 3 to 4 a year. We put in that time ourselves and adjust our schedules to cover the time. We don't put in for overtime. We only have a staff of 10 people. We're very low tech. It's paper ballots. Now, I would say that if that were the bar that we continued, I honestly don't see where there's a significant cost. If, however, the thought is write-in ballots, perhaps like being able to same-day register, all of that, there will be a cost. And so we'd want to look through that. Final thought, and then I will stop so that we can have questions, is that the current legislation in particular, I did give 3 reasons where I have concerns. The most significant one is lack of quorum. I think that every act a commission does requires a quorum of SMDs filled and a quorum of commissioners taking action. If that doesn't happen, there is no official act. I think that standard is important, and I think that standard must be maintained. I also think that if there is not a quorum of commissioners present, even if we go down the appointment road, I think that would have to trigger the board doing an election because there's not a quorum of seats filled. So there's no way to move forward. And we actually had that scenario at the beginning of this year with 2 commissions. 2A, which is West End, did not have a majority of SMDs filled for quite some time. In that case, they were fortunate that the people that stepped up did not result in contested elections, so they could be filled, they could move forward. It took them about 2 months. The ANC 8D, Bellevue area, also had that problem. Again, we weren't restricted from working with the commission to have an election, since clearly no commissioners are required to be in an election. But in order for the winner of that election to be certified by the board, we had to wait for another single-member district to get an uncontested person appointed. So literally the person who was elected in February could not be seated until after someone who picked up a petition after that election occurred could be appointed. They had to wait. So Clearly, I have a lot to say about this. You probably have more questions than I have answers, but I'm happy to be here to have any conversation that's helpful.
Thank you so very much for coming forth and being willing to talk with us today about this bill. As I mentioned to the public earlier, we have had conversations with your office and conversations, of course, with the Board of Elections representatives. And we thought that the drafted language was a solution that both agencies thought was doable. Were you happy with it? I can't say that you were, but we were trying to facilitate a process. I think today, in hearing some of the examples that you have cited, and some of them are new, I hadn't heard them before, and then some of what the sitting commissioners put on the table, it sounds like we're at a point of impasse. We really and truly are. You are correct that back in the day, the Advisory Neighborhood Commissioners Commission process was within my purview as I worked on the operating side of government. And we actually put together a manual. And maybe it worked then, but that was many, many moons ago. And so we are today where we find that our commissioners tend to be individuals who also have other lives. They're doing other things. 20, 30, 40 years ago, most of the commissioners were retirees or persons who were just, activists in community. So they were around and on the street and engaged almost daily with their constituents. Today, it's a more professional group. In other words, they have other things, other lifestyles that are competing with their commission duties. And I can understand, therefore, we have to come up with a system that addresses who really is willing to do this voluntary work. Because we know that the commissioners are not paid. Now, they made that decision 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Perhaps today we need to revisit that issue. And when I say paid, some sort of stipend, I believe, is appropriate. Because as you know, in this world, a financial agreement makes it clear that you have some authority as well as some responsibility. And I think that that is also a part of what we're looking at. In other words, we may be looking at how do we right-size the ANC or the Advisory Neighborhood Commission process that we've held very dear since home rule in this city. We may need to look at it anew. I hear what you're saying, and I'm just thinking that today we can examine a couple of concepts that have been put on the table. We can start with Commissioner Edwards' first thought, and that is maybe if we have a vacancy and it is deemed not fillable because we do not have a quorum, maybe automatically that position can be filled through an appointments process with the council member for that ward area. Maybe that makes sense. That would be one thing I thought we might want to talk about today. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
No, absolutely. When I heard Commissioner Edwards speaking, I thought there was a lot of wisdom there. And why I referenced her testimony when I was speaking earlier. I think that for the seats that are vacant for a significant period of time, it would make sense for a ward council member to maybe see if there's someone they could, like, give them the option to appoint somebody. I think in some ways that could be closer to a win-win. It would allow it to go through at least 2 or 3 cycles of the board putting out requests for nominations so that that is not closed. But having perpetual vacancies creates additional workload for the commissioners who may not know those neighbors as intimately, who have constituents of their own that they want to represent. So having a solution so that a single member district isn't vacant for 9 months, 10 months, an entire year would be great. And then to go back to where I started, one thing I do want to make clear, I'm not, my intent here today was not to oppose this bill or necessarily support this bill, but merely to have constructive dialogue.
And that was my purpose also. Thank you very much for that, Ken. I guess I'm also wondering, we go through the wonderful process of having names on the ballot, candidates that are running for various single member district positions. And then we end up with, let's say it's a 5-member body commission, and we end up with maybe 2 being elected. We now have 3 vacancies. No one stepped up. No one is on the ballot. I don't think we have the luxury of waiting 6, 9 months, because really and truly that commission is not really functioning. Although if it's 2 members, you have to go with those present and voting. And so you do have 2 members, but you don't, so you do have a quorum of those that are elected. No, that's not true.
No, the way that the statute is written is a quorum of SMDs must be filled. So let me.
Do they follow Robert's Rules of Order?
They do, but the Robert's Rules of Order don't supersede statute. Like, statute is governing when it speaks. So, but between Robert's Rules and statute, what's required is you have to have a quorum of SMDs filled. And then, so say you have 10 seats, you would need 6 to be filled. And then of the 6, you would need 4 people to be present. So you don't have to have a quorum of the seats filled and in person, but you have to have a quorum of the quorum. Does that make sense?
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, Ms. Wichter's pointing out that the statute says a majority of the seats filled. So that would be 1 more than 50%.
Yes, but the statute can stipulate, but it seems to me the statute cannot mandate, because if you hold an election and you only have candidates for 2 of the 5 single member districts, these are individuals who step forward. What do we say? Do we say to the Board of Elections, you don't have enough candidates, so therefore we cannot hold an election for that ANC?
Well,
even before those names are presented to the voters?
Well, see, that's the rub. So in a general election, those elections move forward.
How do, what does that mean? I'm sorry.
Like if in a general election in November, if 2 of the SMDs have candidates and 3 don't, those elections move forward. They have elections.
But
right?
my point is, based on what you're saying, that they will not have a quorum, and within the statute, it requires them to have an election of the body, which would be the 5 members. So I'm asking, should the Board of Elections nullify and say, thank you, candidates ANC 6-2 and 6-4 for stepping up, but we don't have candidates for 6-1 and 6-3, and therefore we can't have an election.
I think I follow you.
Okay.
So I think ANC 8D is a good example. They did not have a quorum of SMDs filled at the beginning of the year, and they had two candidates that stepped up for one of the SMDs that was vacant. While we stepped in, and as in the office of ANC stepped in and conducted that election, we overstepped our authority because I don't believe we have the authority to conduct elections. But the election was conducted. There was a winner. But the statute also requires that the commission send a resolution to the board requesting that the vacancy be filled. Now, that would have to be rethought. Again, if the Board of Elections were in the room, I see no reason why they need a resolution. They are there, right? And that would solve that problem. But currently, because the board is totally uninvolved in a special election, the board, by their own rules, require, well, and it's in the statute, but they require a resolution asking the board to fill it or to declare it no longer vacant. And then it gets published in the DC Register. So the problem there isn't that the election didn't occur, it's that it requires a board to take action to request the board take action.
All right. Let me ask you then, are we in agreement, you and I, that we probably would be well served if we could create a task force and sort of talk through many of these issues so we can get some sort of resolution proposed, and probably we will have to make some adjustments in the ANC law. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Okay.
Completely no daylight between us.
Okay. I'm looking at the time and thinking, it's a snowy day, and do we want to be here till 6:30 p.m. tonight? Because I think we have an ANC actual shindig, but I do think it would be worthwhile for us to formulate a task force if you would be up to that, and I will try to get moving in that direction. I know that the ANCs are under the purview of I think the Housing Committee still. Okay, all right. So I will speak to my colleague and see if we can't get a task force going so that we can answer these questions. We have election season 2026 before us. Individuals may be wanting to run, others may say, nope. So let's see if we can't get some legislation out there prior to the June beginning of the actual voting and tabulation, so that maybe we'll excite the world of the District of Columbia to come forward, and every position will be on the ballot. So that would be my thought.
If I may encourage the more urgency we can give this, the better. My founding concern here is that as commissions are no longer, due to that 2022 act, that the responsibility has been broken for who conducts these. That is a significant problem. The OANC, our office, has never been responsible for conducting. We've been responsible for assisting. We've been responsible for counting, but we've never been assigned the authority to conduct an election. That has been until recent, well, depending upon who you talk to, some still think it is with the commission. But clearly, if no commissioner has to be present, then they're not responsible for conducting an election. To me, that's critical because that's where the house of cards falls apart.
All right, so today, how many vacancies do we have that are vacant because a candidate did not appear on the ballot in 2024?
I would have to look. I know that we have 9 single-member districts that have been vacant because there was no candidate in 2024 and no one has picked up paperwork since then.
All right.
So that's
it's
9.
9 that fill that. And so since then, where you had a position filled, how many have vacated that were elected in 2024 but are currently vacant?
I would like to, well, I'll say I'll get that to you, but I believe, because it's not in front of me, I did give that a spreadsheet I've been tracking to Elspeth, which tracks when commissioners leave, when those SMDs are refilled. I don't know if it's necessarily a responsibility assigned to us, but I think if we're talking about elections and
Yes.
trying to plan for training incoming commissioners, it's very useful data. And so starting last year, I started to track how long some of these seats have been vacant and what the cycle is for stepping off and replacing, or not replacing, but filling.
All right. Yeah, if we could get that, if we could get it, let's say by the end of next week,
Easy.
and then we can get going and, all right, and any thoughts you have on what the task force might look like as it relates to our election, let me know, please, by the end of next week as well. All right. Anything else you think we can cover today? Okay. All right. Yes, we think. I'm a little concerned, Kent, because you made it very clear that you're playing it by the book. In other words, you're doing what the code says you must do, and what the job description says, and which I feel is correct. But I'm just stuck with this thought that we have a law that we're trying to follow, which stipulates the existence of ANCs, and we do not indicate how we fill vacancies and who's responsible for doing that. Could you talk a little more about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, man, you really want me to open this up. I have long felt that the ANC Act, from beginning to end, needs a thorough review and revision. It's been my observation that over time, there have been many well-meaning revisions, oftentimes by council members who are listening to constituencies, like the 4-hour requirement sounds great. We're expanding democracy. We want to hear from more people. But as you well know, most of your colleagues, or a majority of your colleagues, have never served as a commissioner. They don't necessarily know what the job is. They don't understand the requirements of people who work a 40-plus hour week and then give to their community in the evenings and weekends and every other waking moment. And there's a lot of parts of the statute that are contradictory. There are some that are overly burdensome, that are several that are unclear. In fact, there's one I can think of from a couple of years ago when we went back to the council member who introduced the legislation and said, this doesn't work. And the feedback we got wasn't an interest in fixing or updating the statute. It was more of a directive of, well, can you make it work? Like, again, it only makes it work as long as my institutional knowledge that's made some decisions is here. I could be gone tomorrow and we're back to having it broken. And so I think there's a lot of well-meaning things in there. And one of the key pieces that, in my opinion, is missing at various places is there's a lot of shalls and not a lot of mays, which means our hands are frequently tied and there's very little discretion that's given to our office to find workable solutions when the law is rigid. And so that's why I go back to, I think it would be very healthy to review this entirety of the ANC Act, because it's been, 50 years ago, it was solid, but it probably had some things that were missing that needed to be amended. As we get here, it's a hodgepodge of well-meaning tweaks and pulls and insertions. Again, all of them well-meaning, and I think I understand some of the intent, but when it doesn't work, how do you undo something that doesn't work when the council has passed it and the language is unforgiving? And like that could go for a vacancy filling. It could equally go towards how we deal with grants. It could go to a lot of things. And I'll just put out there that I think the last time anyone tried to do a comprehensive ANC omnibus, it was you. So you know I'm not talking about a simple thing or an uncontroversial thing. And I thank you for your efforts then, but it's still been changed since you introduced the omnibus.
Yes, thank you very much. And I mean, this is a daunting task. I understand that, but this is a part of our government, and we're unique. And at the same time, we say that this is necessary. So let's see what our task force can come up with this voting process, how we fill the vacancies, et cetera. I look forward to that.
If I may offer one thing in closing, I'm thinking too that, again, with the experience we share with the omnibus, you probably a bit more than me. What I would like to see come out of a task force or working group maybe is a roadmap to address specific topics, like vacancy fillings as a topic, perhaps resolutions as a topic, perhaps there's another thing that comes to surface as a topic. And then we break those down and go through the entirety of the ANC Act with just that as the focus, rather than bite off more than we can chew.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And that would be my thought as well, that I'm hearing, I mean, I'm a little unsettled from the comments that came from, our commissioners, because it's like, what's the Office of ANCs doing? Shouldn't they be doing this? Shouldn't the Board of Elections be doing this? Yes, I agree the task force would have could have a real strong purpose as to how we move forward with the ANC process in the city. So I thank you very much for your testimony and coming out again on a wonderful day. Of course, we could be in Chicago or Detroit, where snow is always available to them. So thank you both for being here. And thanks to all of our public witnesses who came and testified today. Most of our testimony was virtual. We appreciate that. The committee will move forward points made during today's testimony to the Board of Elections for their official response for the official record. I want to note that they were not here today to put their comments on record, but we will get written testimony from the Board of Elections. As a reminder, additional testimony may be submitted for the record through the council's hearing management system or by emailing it to the committee at CEAL@dccouncil.gov. And that is CEAL@dccouncil.gov. The record will close 10 business days from today on Friday, December 19th, 2025 at 5 p.m. This concludes today's hearing. With that, the time is now 1:20 on December the 5th, same day in which we started.